Who is the Gaulish Mercury? Note, this is built on top of all my previous videos and articles and the full set of Finn code names that can be identified. Thus, this is a sort of advanced level video on my channel, the culmination of several layers of methodical deduction and systematic progress. It will be very difficult to get the most out of this video without first understanding the evidential basis I am working from to get to these conclusions, so I highly recommend watching some of my other videos first, particularly those on Finn or the Celtic Odin or the creation myth. Nonetheless, the only way to actually find the solution to this ancient question is to go through this extensive process of layered comparison, and the reason the correct solution has never been found before is because that process has never been fully or carefully enough undertaken. People want to think they can quickly look at Lu and the inscriptional evidence of Lugus and draw a conclusion without great time investment. For those who really want the solution to the question of who the Gaulish Mercury is, an hour or two of information upload will be a small price to pay. The answer will continue to elude commentators for as long as they neglect this step of in-depth comparative mythology and try to interpret a core mystery of the pantheon without having interpreted the pantheon properly to begin with. Because to progress in Celtic mythic understanding, we have to be able to accept that an entire field can have been incorrect on an important topic for a century or more. That an entire field, due to complexity and confusion, things Celtic myth is rich in, can have been operating at still only a 10 or 20% understanding of its material, yet making attempts to answer the big mysteries within its horizon based on that 10% comprehension. Imagine if you had only a 10% knowledge of what all of the organs of the body did, and then you tried to make a grand deduction about the cause of cancer in one of the organs you had a 10% understanding in, or even merely tried to guess at the definite function of that organ. If you hadn't learned it, you wouldn't know it. And if you hadn't at least learned about the accurate functioning of the rest of the body's organs for context, you wouldn't be able to accurately deduce the function of a single organ secondarily. Now, if you did hazard a guess, based on the best inferences you had available, it would be entirely possible, even expected, that when someone properly and systematically learned about all of the organs, that this exponential degree of context would make your initial theory appear far from the mark, no matter how carefully founded on the available inferential scraps it had been. Such is the case for the dominant theories of the Gaulish Mercury, as it appears, carefully founded on scraps that lack the necessary larger contextual understanding to shed enough light on their true meaning. So, who is the Gaulish Mercury mentioned by Caesar? This has been one of the chief mysteries of Celtic reconstructive, religious, and mythological studies for as long as the study has been around. This is not least because Julius Caesar calls this Mercury the primary or most worshipped god of the Gauls, even above the Jupiter that he names right after him. In Caesar's Gallic War, Book 6, Chapter 17, he makes what has become a famous and extremely mysterious statement about the religion of the Gauls. Quote, "Among the gods they most worship Mercury. There are numerous images of him. They declare him the inventor of all arts, the guide for every road and journey, and they deem him to have the greatest influence for all money-making and traffic." Unquote. Thus, counterintuitively relative to the Roman and Greek pantheons, Caesar points to their most worshipped god and says he is equivalent of the tricksy god of eloquence and trade, Mercury, not Jupiter. Many scholars, some of them very renowned, such as Henri d'Arbois de Jubanville, have attempted to connect the surviving evidence related to the Gaulish Lugus and his insular counterparts, Lu and Lle, to this concept of a Mercury type, who is both the most worshipped god and the inventor of all the arts. This has been a valiant attempt, but it should be said, not greatly successful. Not ultimately anything close to satisfying. No very clear picture of how this would have worked emerges, and the points of supposed connection between Lugus and Mercury are extremely fragmented, and small scraps of material are often twisted to fit the desired picture. The entire comparison essentially rests on one prominent claim in Caesar's description, that this particular Mercury is inventor of all the arts, something the Roman Mercury notably is not. Lu of the Irish myth, on the other hand, equivalent of Lugus, is very prominently called Samhain, fairly translated as skilled in many arts together. And proponents of Lu or Lugus as the candidate of the Gaulish Mercury make much of this epithet and Lu's displayed skill in many arts. But we are often the victims of seeing what we want to see when we work with such small sets of evidence. If the argument has really only one impressive pillar holding it together, with other scraps hung loosely around that pillar, it is in danger of crumbling at once if that pillar is itself a misinterpretation or a forced fit, if it is not actually saying what we want it to be saying. Because it has to be said first that Lu's title Samhain does not mean inventor of all arts, and he is not the inventor of all arts, or perhaps of any, depending on a couple of borderline cases. This is emphatically not a mere quibble, as inventor of arts is a very specific role, implying specific theology, and Caesar is very specific with his word choice here. Of course, it would be possible for the Gaulish Lugus to be inventor of arts, and Irish Lu only to be their master, and for these to trace to an original shared concept. But this undeniable disjunction that we have here is a chink in the solidity of the connection that leads us to question it further. Is that really what's going on here? We need more context, more evidence in order to judge. Not only does Lu not invent the arts, it is an emphatic part of his mythic narrative that he does not do so. All of the arts that he says he is master of when he comes onto the scene are explicitly stated in that very story to already exist and be mastered by other individuals. This being stated outright when Lu arrives to Tara to announce himself. Lu famously tells the doorkeeper he can do a series of arts and skills and asks if they have anyone for each of those. The doorkeeper replies that they do already each time. At the end of the long list, Lu asks if they have anyone who can do all of these things, and the doorkeeper concedes they do not, and thus lets him in. Lu thus gaining his reputation and nickname as the Samhain, the one who is skilled in many arts together. Essentially, all of the arts exist before Lu then, and his role is to appear as a latecomer and master all of them together. This does not at all suggest an inventor of arts. It is crucial to note and emphasize that, as we have seen from reconstructing the Celtic pantheon and its structure as a whole, Lu, as the Mitra type, is quintessentially the latecomer. This late arrival is core to his structural position and his identity. None of this is accidental. Things are already well on their way at his moment of arrival. Mitra/Lu is the ruler of the second half of the cosmic year, because that is the day half, aligned with the May through October or summer/autumn period. Hence also Lu's festival falling in the middle of this time, and Lu also being said to achieve his final victory over Balor and Bress at the very end of this time on Samhain. But the night half, or the winter, comes first, and the night period of the cosmic year is the time for origins, and so for inventions of all things. That has all happened already when Lu finally comes on the scene to be the culminator, perfecter, and encompasser of everything that was set up before him, becoming the all-in-all sovereign of the now established world and ruling in the second or day half. Again, this is perfectly expressed in Lu's own mythos and requires no stretching to see. Nuada has already been ruling long before Lu's arrival, and the first battle of Moytura has happened without Lu. The Tua de Danann first arrived to Ireland and set up without Lu being born yet. Some commentators have tried, with a grain of desperation, to see Welsh Lle as the inventor of shoemaking, for example, in order to connect him to some specific art. Yet even in the Mabinogi there are 4 total divine shoemakers narrated in sequence, and Lle is the very last of all of them. These are Manawydan, Pryderi, Gwydion, and finally the young Lle. Lle/Lu is always coming at the end of the order of divine craftsmen because this is his exact and intentional structural role. Once again, none of this is accidental. There is no question at all that Lu and Lle are closely connected to arts and skills. This is not at all what is at issue. What is being pointed out is that Lle/Lu is almost never the original inventor of any arts, even the ones he's most notably connected to, like shoemaking, and that he emphatically is shown to be a late adopter and jack of all trades of these arts instead. The inventor of the arts is what we are looking for if we want a strong link to the Gaulish Mercury of Caesar, not the jack of all trades who rules the second half. Certain caveats can be offered, of course, without this general pattern ceasing to be true. The only things that Lu is said to originate, or rather bring to Ireland, found in the Book of Invasion's narrative, are horse racing, the board game Fichel, ball games, and assemblies. It's very questionable if any of these are arts at all, though a couple of them could be argued as border cases, and they much more fall under the categories of games and gatherings. It's not like Lu is said to invent the skill or art of horse riding itself, only the organizing of this into a competitive race. And in all, this is only 3 or 4 things, a small minority against the numerous more clear-cut arts, rather than games, that Lu is explicitly and simply not the inventor of. In addition, the tininess of the actual Gaulish evidence of worship of Lugus himself has to be brought before one's eyes. One could say there are almost no inscriptions to Lugus in all of Gaul, and not be far from the truth. What? Almost no inscriptions to this god who, if he is Mercury, is supposed to be the most worshipped in Gaul, and who Caesar says has many images made of him? This is not making sense. To be specific, there is only one inscription of a form of the singular name Lugus itself, and this is found in Iberia and not Gaul. There are a few other inscriptions to the plural Lugoves, a title that has not at all been clear in meaning to scholars, and these two are mostly centered in Iberia. The rest of the main pieces of evidence pointing to a cult of Lugus are place names such as Lugdunum and 10 or fewer other place names of note. Many of these place names are even highly disputed among scholars regarding whether they have any etymological connection to Lugus in actuality. The notable slimness of the evidence for worship of Lugus is excellently summed up in the blog post Lugos and Gaulish Mercury on earthandstarryheaven.com, also known as the We Are Star Stuff blog. See the link. As that commentator states, quote, "Given that Lu was such an important deity, and that Lugos could be the Celtic Mercury that Julius Caesar describes, you would expect Lugos to also be an important and well-attested god. So it's a bit of a shock to look up the Gaulish god Lugos on the Epigraphic Datenbank and find no inscriptions matching his name. Why is Lugos so often assumed to be the Gaulish Mercury when there's very little evidence for his worship in France?" Unquote. In addition, on top of 5 or 10 or so place names not being some majority, Place names do not at all tell us how widely or intensely a given god was worshipped. A place name could be more ceremonial or relate to royal power or other unseen factors, while cults of a different god could yet dominate more broadly in worship. Place names are important but not nearly enough to hang this particular argument on, and this is not some large number, even without excluding the questionable etymologies. On the other hand, we have actual inscriptions and engravings and cult objects that can be looked at regarding actual worship in Gaul, and we will see what picture these paint later in the video. In all of these Gaulish Mercury inscriptions, not a single one is to Mercury Lugus. That compound name is not found to exist anywhere. Mercury is never connected to Lugus in any direct inscriptional or other evidence. See also the scholar Bernhard Mayer's article, Is Lu to be Identified with Mercury?, where it can be seen that scholars have thoroughly questioned every piece of proposed evidence for the Lugus-Mercury connection since the 1990s and before, and where it can be seen just how slim this evidence is when it is all lined up. We Are Star Stuff cites Meyer for the important point that, quote, in the towns supposedly named for Lu and Camulos, there is not one altar, not one item inscribed with the names of their patron deities. By contrast, the town of Aquileia, whose patron was the healing god Belenus, had 20 plus dedications to its patron god. Meyer, 129, the Epigraphic Datenbank makes it 39, unquote. Indeed, much of the evidence that Lugus was widely worshipped comes from first assuming that Mercury in Gaul is already to be interpreted as Lugus, and then counting all of the inscriptions to the Gaulish Mercuries of names other than Lugus and attributing those to Lugus, to then say that Lugus's worship was or may have been widespread. This, of course, cannot be the main basis for showing that Lugus is the most worshipped god, and thus that he is the Gaulish Mercury in the first place, as that would be a circular and unconvincing argument. Connecting Gaulish Mercuries of other names to a given Celtic god can be part of the argument if other things are established, but the connections of those Mercuries to the given Celtic god have to be much stronger on their own and supported by much more than can be brought in support for Lugus himself. To be very clear, I am not saying there is no evidence of worship of Lugus in Gaul, although the evidence is so slim that the question of whether there was a pan-Celtic Lugus cult at all has been pressed by some scholars. Personally, I think Lugus must have been an important god in Gaul, and much evidence of his worship has probably simply been lost, but still there is in the end no independent evidence that he was the most worshipped god in Gaul whatsoever. And some small and questionable remnants of a cult to him do not get us all the way to most worshipped god by any stretch. Saying Lugus was an important god would not make him the most worshipped and specifically the Mercury of Caesar, and we can just barely establish that he was a worshipped god and a god whom it may have been good to name a place for on occasion. Furthermore, having much more thoroughly decoded and established the Celtic pantheon than previous investigators of this subject had, we can see plainly that Lu holds the role and mythos actually equivalent to Zeus/Jupiter. Lugus was probably important, but is the Jupiter type, not the Mercury type without much stretching and eliminating of structural context. Both Lu and Zeus/Jupiter are the late-coming daylight sovereigns of the gods, clearly holding the throne at the end of a tumultuous mythic cycle, and both seeming to wield the lightning, if Lu's fire spear is indeed that, as it seems to be. Both Lu and Zeus have the birth myth where the paternal predecessor, Balor or Cronus, tries to prevent their birth in order to avoid a prophecy that they will supplant them. The Pushan-type gods, Gwydion and Pan, both help bring the infant who is being hidden away at birth to be nursed in each case. The main caveat here is that Some motifs of the Dagda can be shown to parallel Zeus too, but Lu is the predominant king among the Tuatha, tied more consistently to the sovereignty, and with more narrative myths to identify him directly with Zeus. Both Zeus and Lu can also be aligned most fully to the Vedic Mitra type, the daylight sovereign of oaths and contracts, while the Dagda is more Vayu aligned, but with some shared Dyaush motifs that result in overlap. We must then look at the rest of Caesar's statement with this in mind. Quote, "After him, Mercury, they set Apollo, Mars, Jupiter, and Minerva. Of these deities, they have almost the same idea as all other nations. Apollo drives away diseases. Minerva supplies the first principles of arts and crafts. Jupiter holds the empire of heaven. Mars controls wars." Unquote. So we can see that Caesar directly juxtaposes the Gaulish Mercury with a Jupiter who holds the sovereignty of the skies, implying that the Celtic Mercury does not hold the sky sovereignty, at least overtly, and that a different Celtic god does. It does not seem sufficient or likely to simply assume that this Jupiter is the Dagda type when Lu exists and is the more direct and obvious equivalent of the daylight lightning-throwing king god Jupiter, with both being identified with eagles. When the Dagda is king after Lu dies, it is seemingly more in the interstices of the cycles, and his role as king is more pushed to the background. He is also dying from a wound his entire kingship, which isn't a feature of Jupiter at least. For much of the Dagda's mythos, he is not the king, but is something else. And finally, it's questionable whether such a Dagda type had an important sovereign role in all Celtic branches. His true Welsh parallel seems to be the less prominent ploughman god, Amaethon, as the Dagda is the one made to slave away as a digger of earthworks and clearer of land in more than one story. And because Bran, his other plausible match, has been shown by me to parallel Down instead most directly, as in the parallel death scenes of Bran and Aver Down, and their connections to speaking severed heads or speaking corpses and remote southwesterly underworld isles where they symbolically reside. But even if Amaethon and Bran were combined into a sort of Dagda Down, Dagda/Down, they still would not be as classically Jupiterian as Lle, the kingly god who turns into a symbolic Jupiterian eagle when he is in a state of living death, and who brings confident victory in the conclusion of his story, as Zeus goes always with Nike, victory. Such a Dagda Down or Amaethon Bran would be kingly like Bran is, but would be more earthy, chthonic, and underworldly than what is usually taken for a Jupiterian god sitting upon the throne of sky. Bran is simply much closer to something like a Dispater. So in sum, there already is a Jupiter, a sovereign god, mentioned in Caesar's account, and this rightly should be the Lugus type, with no evidence that a Dagda-like god, like Sukelos, was seen as the Jupiter for the Gauls instead, in order to account for this slot. The Mercury Caesar mentions is expressly not the king of the gods, most directly and unavoidably contradicting Lu and Lle's main and quintessential role, king of the gods. Truly, as we will see, if you don't put Lu in the place of Caesar's Jupiter as the sovereign of the heavens, and the Finn type in the place of Mercury, the resulting picture never quite fits. However, if you instead try placing the direct equivalent of Odin, who is Finn as we have seen in this role, as we know the Romans like Tacitus consistently called Odin Mercury. If you just try Finn, Odin's equivalent, as Mercury, and the proper Dalit sovereign god Lu as Jupiter, the sovereign of the heavens, you realize that this expresses perfectly the complex dynamic that already exists in Irish and Welsh mythology themselves. Irish and Welsh myth have the main sovereign of daylight and lightning, that being Lu/Lle. But then they have a more esoteric god who works behind the scenes, who somehow is more about the hidden world, and yet who arguably is the true leading divine figure in all of Celtic myth, just as much as Odin is in Norse. This behind-the-scenes leading god is Finn, or Gwyn. He is directly connected to primordial knowledge, and thus to arts, and as we will see, even to the invention of arts, and his popularity and importance within the mythic tradition, which could easily reflect also his popularity in worship, is immense, though it has been greatly underappreciated due to being poorly understood. So important were the tales of Fionn that traditionally it was a requirement that they be told only after nightfall and with one's hat removed out of respect. There are no other Celtic story cycles that have this reverence requirement attached to them as far as I'm aware, and this should tell us something important about Fionn. But I have systematically analyzed the Celtic mythic corpus and carefully collected all of the by-names which can be safely and evidentially decoded as actually names of Finn or Gwyn, or connected to him like an aspect. This has to be done before any sort of accurate picture can be seen, and if it is not done, then one is giving up before beginning. Only when these alternate Finn-type names are all collected together can one see who the most prominent and popular god of the Celts is and was, and that the problem hasn't been lack of material for evidence, but has been the fact that this god, exactly like his counterpart Odin, went under a wide array of names, and yes, even disguises, so that one can never get the full picture of his total and incredible importance without knowing the code of the names and carefully bringing them together. Imagine if Odin appeared in the various poems and stories and inscriptions, but nearly always by an epithet and by name and not the name Odin, and that there was no master list to tell us that each of these refers to a single god who has many names. Then we would be lost in the maze, thinking there were 20 gods, where there were only 20 scattered names of a single and most important god, a matter that an ancient person knowing Odin's names by simple cultural awareness would never have been confused about. Indeed, Odin does appear often under only an epithet, but luckily we have attested lists of his names in the sources, even spoken directly from Odin's mouth, that help us confidently solve this particular riddle. The same situation exists for the Celtic Finn/Gwyn, but with no master list. Only by careful study of the traditions and after many layers of comparative mythology can we confidently assemble something of an equivalent list of names of the Finn/Gwyn type god, which also can only be an open-ended list for the time being. Some of the logic for these name identifications will be mentioned in passing, but again, previous videos and articles have explained these connections much more fully, and they can't all be gone into in this video. So, from the extensive comparative mapping and cross-checking and decoding we have done thus far, we can see that all of the following appear to be by-names of the Finn/Gwyn type god or esoteric aspects of him. Fintan, Parthalon or Parhalon, Gaedhil Glas, Fenius Farsyth, Indhui Folt Find, meaning the wise white-haired, Fachtana Fahach, meaning the hostile wise one, Aver Finn, Fionn Macul, Finn Ekis, or Finnegas, Cumhaill, the father of Fionn, Gael, meaning one-eyed, Avergin, and esoterically Manannán, the fire god, Cian, aka Finn MacKinley, Fiacha, meaning raven, and possibly Ruri, Rudraige, from the Ulster cycle, also found as a name of a son of Parthalon, and also as one of the first Firbolg, and Balor. In the Welsh case, we have Aeroswyth, Efnisien, whose name means hostile, Nisian, meaning peaceful, Gwion Bach, aka Taliesin. Manawydan, again the fire god. Gwydion, the equivalent of Cian. Also other faces of the same Gwydion god who seem to be Coluch, Merlin, and Killider the Wild. And then Isbathaden, if he is the equivalent of Balor. Other possible guises include Gwyddno, Tegid, Elfin, Afalach, Morda, and even Aidd, especially in the Welsh case. Aidd, the King of Ireland, appears in a position equivalent to Fionn in the Irish parallel. Also, Nuada or Nodens and Dian Cecht should be considered as possible other aspects or more loosely esoterically connected, as Nuada seems to bear the name Finnecus. Additionally, it has to be said, contra certain contrarians, that the Gaulish pantheon, being radically different from the insular Celtic one, does not stand up as a starting or null hypothesis. We are not coming at the pantheons of Europe with zero knowledge of how they usually function at this point. We have examined most of them and found, despite the differences, remarkable consistency and even harmony, evidence that each branch does have approximately the same gods and structures represented differently. So the null hypothesis is not that the Gaulish pantheon has to be assumed to be radically different from that of the insular Celts. Instead, due to the underlying harmony between most European pantheons that we have found, the hypothesis of some consistency between the Gaulish and insular Celtic pantheons has to be tried to the full extent first, to see how clear of a picture it can yield and how much it can explain compared to the contrary possibility. Several names like Ogmios, Lugus, Widucus, Gobanos, Maponos, Matrona, Vindonos, Tyrannus, Brigindoni, Nato, Kikoluis, and even Cernunos seem to link the continental Celts and the island Celts quite intimately, and so the idea that they may indeed have had similarity in their pantheon structures has to be taken seriously before it is discarded without evidence. Additionally, between the Celtic and Norse material, we have found numerous stories that are told in very close ways, with the same sets of symbolic images more or less, suggesting perhaps more overlap between Celtic and Norse traditions than previously has been realized. Finn is Fintan, the one-eyed, aka Gaul. He has a spear that never misses, 2 hunting dogs, drinks from a well of knowledge and eats nuts of wisdom from another, creates the magical tree under which one fasts to gain the power of prophecy, is the leader of the Mannerbund or Corios band, divides earth and sky, and as Finn MacKinley goes to the giant's tower to retrieve the stolen sacred liquid and sleep with the giant's helpful daughter while there, etc. In terms of story forms and image symbols, the figure of Finn is closer to that of Odin than any god from another branch is to Odin. Thus, the concept that the Mercury of the Germanics, which we know was what Romans called Odin, being approximately the same god as the Mercury of the Gauls, or Celts, should be a hypothesis taken seriously from the start. Based on Tacitus and others' read of Odin, we know what the Romans considered a Mercury type. If Odin is consistently Mercury to the Romans, why shouldn't the Gaulish Finn type be the strongest candidate for what the Romans would have seen as a Mercury among the Gauls, since Finn and the Finn type is the real direct equivalent of Odin? With this groundwork, let's begin with a secure link between one Gaulish Mercury name and one Finn/Gwyn connected insular mythological god. Mercury Widucus equals Welsh Gwydion. Gwydion, presumed father of Lle, is the equivalent of Cian/Finn MacKinley, father of Lugh, as has been established by myth comparisons. In Mercury Widicus, we have a Mercury connected to woods, seemingly identical in name root with Gwydion, who is the Welsh Pwsian type, and as such, an aspect of Gwyn/Finn, as we've explored in other videos and articles. We know Odin, usually the Rudra type, is also the Pwsian type when he seeks the stolen mead and sneaks into the fortress of Suttungur, so Gwydion/Cian, as an aspect of Gwyn/Finn, matches the Germanic Mercury, Odin. This is why Cian has as his alternate name Finn mac Cinnelly, because he is being esoterically identified with Finn, just as this particular role is just part of Odin in the Norse case. So the Irish equivalent of Gwydion is Cian, but he is also called Finn mac Cinnelly, as noted, and alternately just mac Cinnelly with the Finn name unstated, suggesting that Cian, and thus probably his Welsh equivalent Gwydion, were indeed seen as esoterically continuous with Finn/Gwyn, exactly as the Pwsianic role was seen as continuous with the greater Odin in Norse myth. Gwydion is possibly the most stereotypically Mercury-like of all the main mythic level parallels, as he engages in tricky trade with Pryderi, a trade he wins using deception. He is shown as master of eloquence when he is called chief of song and best teller of tales. Hermes, and thus Mercury, is known as extremely tricky, especially with his eloquent use of language, and he is a teller of tales, a teller of the myths. This eloquence of Gwydion shows a skill that he then directly uses in the sphere of trade, but also that he is foremost master of the particular arts of song and story. Gwydion also has magical arts of illusion and helps Math to create the flower woman Blodeuwedd with other enchantments. So he does know other magical arts generally. It seems likely that these magical arts of Gwydion of the Woods feed into the later figure of Merlin the Wild, who is surely an Odinic figure. Gwydion is also connected to another trade, as he disguises himself and the young boy Lle as shoemakers or cordwainers. In the scene from the fourth branch of the Mabinogi, it is Gwydion who first is said to begin shaping and stitching shoes, and making them for Arianrod. It is then said that when Arianrod came down to them at the shore, Gwydion was shaping the shoes and Lle was stitching them. Clearly, Gwydion here is the elder shoemaker in the scene, Lle, the young boy, being mentored and guided by Gwydion all the while. Gwydion beginning the shoemaking and then involving Lle in it as they go, after Gwydion makes the plan to disguise them both as these shoemakers. Lle gets called one of the three golden shoemakers in the Welsh triads, but in the Mabinogi scene itself, Gwydion is clearly the one who originates the shoemaking practice and involves Lle in it, so in no way can the scene support Lle as the inventor of the art, while it's possible that it could suggest Gwydion as such. But Manawydan is actually one of the other golden shoemakers of Britain in the same triad that mentions Lle as such, and Manawydan acts in relation to his young ward Pryderi exactly like Gwydion does toward Lle in this scene, as the shaper and beginner of the shoemaking work, and Manawydan and Pryderi becoming these shoemakers happens before Gwydion and Lle arrive to do the same. We will come back to this in relation to Manawydan, who we can also tie to an aspect of Gwyn/Finn, and it is a key point to keep in mind. We will also see later that the root of Gwydion also forms the word Gwyddel, meaning woodsman, which comes to mean Irishman, and that this word, Gwyddel, gets borrowed into Irish as a name for the Irish. At that point, we find this name in the forms Gaedhil or Gaedhil, as the name of an identifiably Finn or Rudra type figure in the pseudo-history in the Book of Invasions. More on this later, but keep in mind how the root of Gwydion also forms the name of this crucial, identifiable Finn type figure, Gaedhil, all coming from this concept of the woodsman and connecting back to an attested Gaulish Mercury under the cognate name Widucus. Yes, Widucus appears etymologically related to the word Gael. Next, we have Finn himself, appearing primarily as Fionn MacCool, Eivor Finn, and Fintan, also known as Gaul, the one-eyed salmon of knowledge. Finn's name means fair or white-haired, but also is a byname for poet, and so Finn is always taken as the archetype of the seer poet. Thus, he doesn't explicitly invent the art of poetry, but his mythology implies that he both embodies and rediscovers all knowledge, including the poetic knowledge, by eating a fish which is identified with his own name, that is, Fintan/Gaul Essa Ruath. This then causing the outpouring of the divine poetry. In the Fionn story, he composes his first poem right after the eating of this fish. As in the story of Taliesin, he arrives to court and pours out his prophetic poems to the king after the equivalent scene of inspiration. This could be taken as the archetype of the invention of poetry on a higher mythical level, now surviving in the Euhemerized tales, especially since the fish that Finn eats seems to be his own self, who already periodically has the knowledge that produces poetry. Thus, while there's no proof that young Fionn invents poetry, no other figure does either, and his myth type does suggest that he embodies and discovers from within his own higher self the divine essence of poetry and wisdom that he is, in a sense, being identified with. If the story is taken as depicting an eternal moment out of time, then it can be read as the reinvention of poetry in a cyclical event recurring eternally, with three aspects of Finn as the instigator, taster, and primordial embodiment of the poetic knowledge. As soon as Fionn eats the salmon, he both says his first inspired poem and also learns the three things that constitute a poem. These three elements or techniques also relate directly to the prophetic aspect of poetry. They are prophetic techniques. We must be honest and clear-sighted. There is no other episode in Irish myth that is as close to an invention of the techniques of poetry, and prophetic poetry specifically, as this story is, other than the pseudo-historical one we will mention later. And so this event has to be appreciated as probably symbolic of poetry's invention or reinvention within the tradition. Quote, "Thereupon the youth ate the salmon. It is that which gave the knowledge to Finn, so that whenever he put his thumb into his mouth and sang through Tem Lida, then whatever he had been ignorant of would be revealed to him. He learnt the three things that constitute a poem, Tem Lida, Imhas Foroshna, and Diketul Dichenav. It is then Finn made this lay to prove his poetry. Mayday, season surpassing, splendid is the color then. Blackbirds sing a full lay, if there be a slender shaft of day, etc., etc." Unquote. The same should be said for when Gwion Bach tastes the liquid of inspiration and then is reborn as the newborn Taliesin. As soon as Elfin catches him in, coincidentally, a fishware, as if he is the symbolic fish and the roles have just switched a bit here, Taliesin bursts into his first inspired and specifically prophetic poetry, thus embodying the same moment of poetic origination that Fionn does in the parallel tale just mentioned. Quote, "Well, they took up the leathern bag, and he who opened it saw the forehead of the boy, and said to Elfin, Behold, a radiant brow. Taliesin, be he called, said Elfin. And he lifted the boy in his arms, and lamenting his mischance, he placed him sorrowfully behind him. And presently the boy made a consolation and praise to Elfin, and foretold honor to Elfin. And the consolation was as you may see. Fair Elfin, cease to lament. Let no one be dissatisfied with his own. To despair will bring no advantage, etc." Unquote. There is another angle on this question of the invention of poetry and art generally. As mentioned in a recent video, Stella Cromrish describes how Vastoshpati Rudra, in the creation myth moment of attacking Father Dyaush in the Rig Veda, is also defending the sacred house that is the cosmos, and in this particular role, he is the inventor of all of the arts, and poetry is his domain. This seems to be because the house that is the cosmos in this mythic moment is the archetype of all artifice. Its patterns and rhythms are the forms of art and meters of poetry, and he is master and defender of them, while also embodying them due to himself being made by a divine poem. So when the hostile Rudra type in the Welsh story, Efnisien, cleanses the giant house filled with assassins while warring against Father Sky, Mytholic, and he just happens to speak the first lines of poetry within the 4 branches of the Mabinogi, the Welsh instance with Efnisien can be interpreted as a coded myth of the instantiation of poetry by the Welsh Vastoshpati Rudra as it is happening in this specific primordial creation myth moment. If nothing else, keep in mind that Efnisien is indeed the first figure to speak lines of poetry in the 4 branches, effectively laying claim to being the first poet in what is the main myth cycle of the Welsh. Efnisien is, as we've seen, merely a euhemerized version of the hostile side of the god Gwyn ap Nudd, who also is born in the young Gwion Bach, who becomes Taliesin. In the parallel Irish moment to Efnisien's act, we see Eibhir Finn and his 2 brothers arriving to Ireland to specifically attack the 3 husbands of the triple Mother Earth. In this story, the first outburst of poetry is made by the brother of Eibhir Finn, named Averchin. But we know that Averchin is only the more beneficent side of Eibhir Finn himself, as Shiva is the beneficent side of Rudra. So when Averchin proclaims his poems in this scene, this outpouring can be seen as the first poetry within the creation myth framing, and thus they functionally parallel Efnisien's poetry upon cleansing the house of Mytholic, which is again the first poetry within the creation myth and within the myth cycle. And again, Averchin's poetry can further be seen to parallel the outpouring of Taliesin upon arriving at court after tasting the liquid of inspiration, with that story paralleling Fionn tasting the salmon and doing similarly, speaking his first poetry, as mentioned previously. These instantiations of poetry by Finn types in primordial moments seem to reinforce one another and point to him as its primordial embodiment, inventor, and guardian. Finally, it should be noted that Fintan is among the very first wave of people, before the flood even, to come to Ireland in the Book of Invasions, and among them he comes to embody all knowledge and thereafter to become the salmon of knowledge. This places him at the earliest primordial period and as the container of knowledge there. It would seem logical that all arts originate from knowledge of art, and so the one who contains all knowledge of art would be already a strong candidate for the one who somehow metaphysically must be their origin point. This only ties into the circular or cyclical playing out of the instantiating of these arts in Fionn, Efnisien, Gwydion, and others that we have touched on, out of the higher self of Finn, who is the embodiment of the knowledge at their base. Additionally, Fionn has the myth that technically parallels or comes from a shared root with Odin's gaining of the runes. These runes having connection to writing, magic, and prophecy, and thus to Mercury's own mythos. Finn's story, The Hunt of Slieve Quillen, concludes with him magically aged to an old man and drinking from a magical cup, and then dropping it into the ground. From that cup grows a magical tree, under which one may sit and fast, and if one looks at the branches while fasting, one can prophetically foretell what will happen that day. Let's recall, as mentioned in my previous video, that something like the runes are attested to have been written on branches of trees or pieces of wood, as such. So, though again it is not explicitly stated, This story of Finn may have originally implied that Finn is inventing the art of prophecy by such means in this story, because in the parallel Odin story, he very much is taken to be the originator of the runic letters and thus the inventor of the prophetic and magical arts they are used in, such as the casting of runes, etc., which are traced to this event. Indeed, this story of Odin is one of the main ones that chimes with myths of Mercury, who is known as the god who perceived or invented the letters by observing the flight of cranes. If that is the case for the Odin myth, then no one but Fionn can be said to have the story tracing to a shared root with this Odin myth, in which a special method of tree divination seems to be originated. Fionn, of course, is shown to originate other divinatory practices as well, such as the biting or sucking of the thumb for Imhas Foroshnai. The poem that Aillen speaks upon coming to Ireland in the creation myth is cited as the prophetic practice called Cetal do Chenav, or chanting in prophetic strains, in the metrical tractates number 123. And Aillen, as said, is the other side of Eivor Finn, just as Nisian is of Efnisian, and just as Shiva is of Rudra. And when Odin steals the mead of poetry back, isn't this also portrayed as at least a part of the origination of the art of poetry? Since the drops fall to earth, where human poets then drink of them to make their art. If the same, again, is some unspoken part of the parallel myth, where Cian, aka Finn MacKinnelly, steals back the magical cow, Glas, as if the wondrous cow's milk might have implied a kind of mead of poetry too, or had some similar power, then this Finn MacKinnelly also would have a tie to one aspect of the origin of the art of poetry, or its further production. In any case, he does steal back the sacred liquid, which becomes the archetype of sacred liquids in the tradition. So much for Finn himself. It is much even on its own. We then must include Mannanon, the equivalent of Agni, the fire god, in this picture. Due to the fact that we have the same mytheme of the three brothers dividing earth and sky in the Irish creation myth, the Welsh creation myth, and the Norse, we have to conclude it most likely that these all implied the same sort of theology originally, from a shared source. That is, the trios of brothers in the Celtic parallel creation stories, with Efnisian, Nisian, and Manawydan, or with Eivor Finn, Aillen, and Erevan, acting together in the precise way that they do, dividing earth and sky, suggests exactly what Odin and his two brothers in the creation scene have always suggested. Odin, Hainr, and Lothr dividing Ymir into earth and sky, that these three brothers were very much seen as three sides of one god from the beginning. This is supported by the Vedic instance, and thus also by the Proto-Indo-European picture that can be deduced when the Norse case is compared. The upshot of this is that the hostile Rudra type always had two other faces from Proto-Indo-European times, his calm, beneficent Shiva-type face, and his Agni or fire identity. In the Rig Veda itself, Rudra is Agni. The name Agni is used for the archer Rudra in his most archetypal mythic act of the Rig Veda, and Rudra is capable of being Shiva in the Rig Veda as well, so he can be Rudra-Shiva-Agni. The incredible consistency of this triple face motif, which we then see carried into the Three Brothers myth in the West, has been wildly under-recognized and is a major key to comparative mythology as a whole. Thus, since Manawydan, who is the Agni type, is one of the three brothers in the Branwen, daughter of Llŷr, creation myth scene, where the brothers meet the tree-named symbolic ancestor child, Gwern, appearing there along with his brothers Efnisian and Nisian, when setting aside their fourth brother, of course, Bran, in his own Yama-type category. And since the Irish Erevan is one of the three brothers along with Eivor Finn and Aillen, who directly attack the husbands of Mother Earth, again categorizing Eivor down with the distinct Bran/Yama type, we see that Erevan is in the same position as Manawydon, thus it's a consistent position and type, and that Manawydon is directly identifiable with the Agni type, as I have shown in many places by comparative myths. So we have to deduce that Manawydon and his counterpart, Irish Manannán, were actively seen as esoteric aspects of Gwyn/Finn. The fire god was always seen as the other face of the Gwyn/Finn Rudra type god. This is a Proto-Indo-European theological concept that we are seeing expressed into this triple brother pattern that appears very consistently in both Celtic cases and in the Norse. The principle based on the Norse and Vedic cases should be that the three brothers who act together in the creation myth in this way had to come from an original understanding that they were three faces of one, because that understanding motivates the entire theology underpinning the story. Because Manawydon appears as one of these three creation myth brothers next to the Rudra and Shiva type brothers, Efnisien and Nisien, Manawydon must have always been seen esoterically as another face of the same god with them. Some further points support that deduction as well. Gael, the more troublesome double of Fionn, is born as Aidh, the word for fire, while Cumhaill, Fionn's Fianna leader, father, who I've shown to be the higher Fionn, is called son of Trenver, meaning strong man, while Agni is called son of strength. In the Welsh case, we have a curious instance where Odgar, son of Aidh, again, the king of Ireland, is made to retrieve the tusk of the rampaging boar named White Tusk, while in the parallel scene, Oscar, grandson of Fionn, is the only one who can kill the rampaging boar of 4 Mile. So thus the Welsh Aidh seems to stand in the role of Fionn/Gwyn here somehow, in this particular legendary variation at least. The Irish Manannán also fathers the child Mongan upon a mortal woman, and while such an act in other tales often produces an incarnation of the father deity, in this case, Mongan is said to be the incarnated Fionn mac Cumhaill. In any case, this intimately connects Manannán with an incarnation of Fionn in some obscure esoteric way once again. This brings us back to Manawydon acting exactly like Gwydion in his shoemaking scene. And it must be said that Manawydon's story appears prior in the myth cycle, in branch 3 versus branch 4 for Gwydion, so Manawydon is the earlier shoemaker. Nonetheless, the fact that Gwydion making shoes with lle essentially repeats what Manawydon does with Pryderi supports the idea that Gwydion and Manawydon are esoterically continuous as aspects of the larger Gwyn god type. In the story of Manawydon, he indeed practices multiple crafts, or arts if you will, saddle making, shield making, and shoemaking. Interestingly, Manawydon and Pryderi are also portrayed as supporting themselves as hunters in a wilderness phase before and after the practice of these crafts within society, reminding us of the Fianna wilderness phase before entering society connected to Fionn. By the principle that if a figure in a mythic cycle is the first to explicitly practice something, this may have originally implied that figure originating that thing, depending on the context. These instances could support Manawydon as inventor of these crafts. They do not prove it, but they can support that picture or argument. Via the process of euhemerization, the sense of originating can get lost from such a story. There is one caveat with this argument. As in the Manawydon episode, one of the crafts that Manawydon takes up is said to have a previous master that Manawydon is copying. This, as I've discussed previously, is Llasar. When Manawydon takes up saddle making, he is said to make the enamel as Llasar had made it. Now, Llasar is what is known in Vedic myth as the Purusha, the fiery godhead totality, and in Irish myth, the Purusha, also called Delvaith, is actually Lu-coded, because Delvaith's other name is Lugus. So this Delvaith-Lugus appears like a higher form of Lu due to his naming. By an indirect argument, we could then suppose that Hlasar is also Lu-coded in the same way, but without direct statement or evidence of this. And if so, this would be one point where an argument could be made for an assumed Hle or Lu-coded figure possibly being the first master or originator of a craft. Hlasar might be the only arguable coded Lu type who originates a craft. However, the Vedic Purusha and even Irish Delvaith himself is simultaneously fire or Agni coded. He is the fiery prism of totality of Godhead, and Delvaith is Delv Aith, or forming fire. Aith is also in his name as much as Lu is. The Vedic Purusha is emphatically named Agni, and the Norse Purusha is the fire being Surtur. Please see the Shatapatha Brahmana 6.1.1 for the emphatic identification of the Purusha with Agni. Rudra is always the luminous essence or intensified face of Agni. Within the Manawydan story, we are seeing Manawydan, the Agni type himself, be the one who repeatedly exemplifies multiple crafts. Thus, it would seem much more consistent to interpret the Hlasar mention as being Agni-coded here as well, pointing to the primordial Agni role rather than the Lu role. The higher Agni type Hlasar, who is the fire Purusha, is being copied by his own more specialized fire manifestation within the world, Manawydan. Thus, the original enamel working would be attributed to the fire craftsman aspect of Hlasar the Purusha, and the essence of the fire of Purusha is once again always already the Rudra type, just as Fionn mac Cool appears as the Fianna leader for Lugus mac Con, who is the legendary form of the Irish Purusha. He is being led by Fionn mac Cool. The other face or extreme intensity of fire is Rudra. He is there in the Purusha as his intellect or essence, and so within Hlasar once again, as Hlasar acts as the forming fire craftsman, specifically when he does the first enamel work. It is not primarily a sovereign or Lu type role as much as it is a fire role. Now, even if we did grant Lu/Hle the invention of enamel working here for the sake of argument, which I certainly don't in actuality, then it would only make Lu have one craft invented out of a sequence of 3 to 4. But the claim of Caesar is that there is one Gaulish god who invented all of the arts. So all 3 to 4 crafts here ought to be given to one candidate alone if that is an option on the table. It would then seem the claim would go much more all to Manawydan and his own higher fire self here, especially when considering the esoteric continuity with other art inventors, Finn and Efnisien and Gwydion, in the ways I've already described. Irish Manannán also has the hook and belt of Gofnir, the smith god, suggesting Manannán could be this higher fire craftsman who maybe holds the essence of the crafts in a more esoteric sense than the specific craftsman god. As such, Manannán may have this same connection to crafting in the Irish tradition that we have just seen Manawydan having in the Welsh tradition. Even if Manawydan is excluded from being an aspect of Gwyn for the sake of argument, he still appears downstream of the more primordial Finn/Gwyn type who has more overall art invention connections when we reach the end of the evidence, as we will see. So, song and storytelling, poetry and general knowledge, prophetic practices, shoemaking, saddle making, and shield making. All of these can arguably be seen as first practiced by gods in the mythological layer, esoterically yet definitely connected to one another as aspects of the greater Finn/Gwyn god. But the picture may become even more absolutely one-sided when we include the yet more heavily euhemerized pseudo-history figures within the Celtic corpus. Among these, I am pointing to the famed ancestor figures from the Laur Gawala Erin, Parhalon, Gaedhil Glas, and Fenius Farsaith. The first of these figures, Parhalon and Gaedhil, can be definitely shown to be paralleling specific myths of Fionn himself. thus as doubles of Fionn, while the last, Fenius, appears to be a sort of double of Gaedhil in his name and what he does, and so may have to be treated as another probable continuation of the Finn/Rudra type. Parhalon. Parhalon can be identified as a Fionn doublet due to the story in which his wife commits adultery with a servant, and they are caught by Parhalon due to the drinking of Parhalon's forbidden wine, because this leaves the taste of their mouths on the drinking tube, and Parhalon is able to recognize it. This is nearly a facsimile of the story of Diarmid making away with Fionn's betrothed, Grania, in a similar conclusion. Diarmid's location is discovered by Fionn when Diarmid and Grania eat the forbidden berries of the Tuatha, and give some of the berries to the sons of Gael, who bring them back to Fionn. Fionn immediately scents the touch of Diarmid's flesh on them, and so ascertains his location. In a similar story of Fionn, Fionn's consort attempts to seduce his servant Jerig Cora, thus the servant who commits adultery with the wife of Parhalon while leaving the scent of their mouths on the drinking tube could be a combination of the males who seduce away Fionn's consorts, a simplification of this motif. Overall, the Parhalon story is an extremely Finn-coded story with specific shared motifs. Further, Parhalon actually has 4 sons with identical unique names with sons of Eibhir Finn. These are Orba, Fergana, and Feron. The text even notes that Eibhir Finn indeed is said to have 4 sons with these same exact names, but that they are different somehow. Consider, of course, that Eibhir Finn, coming from Spain at a later epoch, should not have even known of the 4 sons of Parhalon, who had pre-existed long before in Ireland, and so naming his sons in Spain after those primordial Irish sons of Parhalon would make little sense. Clearly, this is a story doublet, once again, 2 likely separate traditions being woven together, and it just so happens that Parhalon, whose story clearly parallels Finn, also has the 4 sons matching identically the 4 sons of Eibhir Finn. This is highly unlikely to be a random accident or one figure naming their sons after the other, and so it's clear that Parhalon is a Finn doublet. Thank you to Bowen Sir for initially bringing the possibility of Parhalon being a Finn double to my attention and pointing out that Parhalon's people also all die of a plague on May 1st, which is the end of the winter period. And this seems the typical date at which the Rudra-type god would go into some kind of exile in the otherworld wilds, would end his rule in a sense, sometimes symbolized by his temporary death or going to the underworld itself, depending on the tradition. This is because the Rudra type is the winter king in a sense, and so it only makes sense that the era of Parhalon's people ends precisely at the conclusion of winter. Note how this is the reverse of the position of Lu in the structure. Parhalon, like Rudra, is the lord of the first half of the cycle, when things are originated and invented. Parhalon is also said to have killed his parents and fled, which reminds vaguely of the Rudra type, typically violently dividing earth and sky in different ways, sometimes in the story killing them, and while they are his parents in the Greek case of Gaia and Uranos, they are not always. So that relationship can shift. Still, earth and sky can be seen as these parental divine principles, and this could be what this simplified echo in Parhalon's story is gesturing at. The fight between Parhalon and the Fomorian leader Cumhaill also reminds me a lot of the fight between Shiva and the Varaha or boar form of Vishnu found in the Kalika Purana. In that fight, Varaha is a leader of a band of Ganas, which are oddly shapen warrior troop members, usually belonging to Shiva. But here both Shiva and Vishnu have similar terrifying Ganas for their war troops. Just so, Cumhaill has oddly shapen warriors as his Fomorian army, and himself apparently has one lame or withered leg, as his surname means clapper leg or withered leg. And yet, Cumhaill is fighting against a clear Rudra type in Parhalon. Thus, Cumhaill himself should be an opposed god type, just like Varaha, who has the odd-shaped ganas in his battle against Shiva. One pretty clear Cuchulainn and Vishnu parallel, the Nart hero Sosruko, or Shoshlan, has a famously lame leg, while Vrika, the son of Andhaka in the Puranas, who is another possible negativized Vishnu aspect, destructive Vishnu aspect, as I've mentioned, also has his 2 legs removed periodically to subdue his rampaging. Krishna also gets shot in the foot to give him a mortal blow, suggesting a possible theme of wounded lower limbs within the Vishnu type. Furthermore, while the usual Vishnu of the Irish, Nate, has the war goddess Nevin as his consort, Varaha has instead Mother Earth as his consort in this specific Kalika Purana story. The name Cumhaill seems to be paralleled by the Gaulish god name Cumhailuis, and Cumhailuis is attested to have 2 goddess consorts, Bellona, goddess embodying war, and Litavia, Mother Earth. Thus, Nate has the war goddess as his consort, and Varaha has Mother Earth as his consort, and the Gaulish god who may parallel both has the war goddess and Mother Earth as his 2 consorts. This is very coincidental then when it is triangulated, and to it can be added the fact that Cumhaill appears to mean meat, though it can also mean breast or muscle, and so the name could imply something like big breast or big muscle. Still, the meat meaning is interesting, since in the conclusion of his battle with Shiva in the Kalika Purana, Varaha the boar gives up his body to be the sacrifice for the gods, and this whole scene of his becoming the sacrificial feast of the gods is depicted, making himself a great boar roast like he is the divine meat itself. Here's a description of the ganas found in the Kalika Purana. Quote, "There arose the Shiva ganas with huge body and of unlimited strength. These were like the ganas of Varaha, who were of different shapes and born from the size of Varaha, but even more powerful than those. Some of them looked like dogs, boars, or camels. Some others were with the face of a monkey, a jackal, and a cow. Some others were in the forms of bears, cats, elephants, or dolphins. Some others were with the face of a lion, a tiger, a snake, and a rat. Some others had the neck and face of a horse. Others were in the shape of a buffalo or man. Some others had the face of a deer or a goat. Some of them were without head, without feet, without hands. Still others were with many heads. Some others looked like Sharabha and Shamilion. Others were with the face of fish, crocodile. They were short, long, robust, or thin, with 8 feet, 4 feet, 2 feet, and 1 foot, or with many hands. Some were like the yakshas, the kimpurushas, and animals. Others were with wings, with a drooping belly, or a big belly, or a long belly, with thick hairs, or with many ears, or without ear, with thick lips, long teeth, long beard." Unquote. So both sides have these similar ganas, which have odd shapes and forms, and then they fight, with Shiva's side defeating Vishnu's, as Parhalon defeats Cumhaill. Now, compare this description to the description of Cumhaill's Fomorians. In the latter recensions of the Laur Gawala Erin, as well as material from the Laur na Nuidra, the Fomorians are described as having 1 arm and 1 leg each, and in Sex Aetates Mundi from the Laur na Huidra, they are classed with beings having the heads either of horses or of goats. See Revue Celtique 1, page 257, Stokes's article, Melange's Mythological Notes, which reads, quote, "Of Ham, successor of Cain, were born Lukrupan and Fomori and Goborchin, horseheads, and every unshapely appearance, moreover, that is on human beings." Unquote. There is some uncertainty about the meaning of this Goborchin, and goat-headed is a possible reading. But remember that some ganas had horse heads and others had goat heads anyway. See John Rees Hibbert Lectures, page 593, quote, "It is not quite certain that it should not be rendered goat-headed." Cormac's Glossary, Stokes O'Donovan, edition, page 83, explains that Gabur was a goat, while Gober meant a horse. See also John Rees, Hibbert Lectures, page 593, quote, "In the same class must be placed a certain Echid Echan, or Echid Horsehead, king of the Fomori," and he cites here the four masters. Thus, the battle of Shiva's Ganas against Varahas might possibly explain why Cumhaill is king of the Gana-like Fomorians, even though his opponent is the Rudra-type figure Parhalon, and why Parhalon defeats Cumhaill, just as Shiva defeats Varaha. Cumhaill's own clapper leg, referenced in his surname Grikenchos, could then go along with the Gana theme of being odd-limbed, but more specifically matches with the Vishnu-type theme of having a lame or wounded leg, seen in the three examples suggested. Also, it should be noted that Cumhaill is an extremely primordial figure, sometimes said to even predate Parhalon, thus placing him as the Vishnu-type opposed to the primordial Rudra makes a lot of sense of this picture. When Parhalon is understood as a highly detailed guise of none other than the Finn type, but portrayed as a founder figure, it's incredible to realize how many of the customs and indeed arts Parhalon and his people are said to establish in Ireland. Members of his people are credited with having introduced cattle husbandry, plowing, cooking, trade, farming, brewing, and building dwellings. We read, quote, "Parhalon had 4 oxen, that is, the first cattle of Ireland. Of his company was Brea, son of Senboth, by whom were a house, a cauldron, and dwelling first made in Ireland. Of his company was Samaeliath, by whom were ale drinking and suretyship, that is, contract guarantees, first made in Ireland. Of his company was Beor, by whom a guest house was first made in Ireland. By that Brea, son of Senboth, a house was first, a cauldron on fire, a feat that the pleasant Gaedhil desert not, dwelling in Ireland. By Samaliliath were known ale-drinking and suretyship. By him were made thereafter worship, prayer, questioning. Bacorb Ladra, who was a sound sage, he was Parhalon's man of learning. He is the first man without uncertainty, who made hospitality at the first. Bibal and Babal, the white, were Parhalon's 2 merchants. Bibal brought gold hither, Babal brought cattle." Unquote. Immediately after this, some of these exact things are attributed to Parhalon directly rather than to his people, supporting the conclusion that Parhalon's people are just symbolic extensions of himself for the sake of the narrative. Quote, "The first building of Ireland without sorrow was made by Parhalon. The first brewing, churning, ale, a course with grace, at first, in good and lofty Ireland. Rimad was the firm tall ploughman, Tyrrell the general head ploughman, Fothbach was the share, no fiction is that, and Fetten the coulter." Unquote. The second recension of the Lower Gawala Erin reads in only slightly different words, quote, "Tothet and Tarba, Imis and Aitekbel, Quill and Dorcha and Dam, the 7 husbandmen of Parhalon, Lee and Limag, Imir and Etirg, the 4 oxen of Parhalon, and Beoil, and the steward of Parhalon. He it is who first made a guesting house. Brea, son of Senboth, son of Parhalon, the first who made a house and a cauldron and dwelling in Ireland. Malaliach, moreover, the first surety and the first brewer, and the first who drank fern ale, and it is he who invented oblation and adoration and sortilege. The 3 druids of Parhalon, Tath, Fis, Fokmark, consolidation, knowledge, and enquiry. Milku, Meron, Muinclian, his 3 champions." Unquote. The names themselves of the men of Parhalon are mostly common nouns, which suggests they are merely the euhemerized embodiments of crafts and customs that the god underlying Parhalon himself probably was seen to have brought. As common individual nouns, they don't have three-dimensional identity in the story beyond being that thing, and furthermore, we are looking for one great inventor of all arts, while an individual embodiment of inquiry or digging could never be that inventor of all arts together. The argument is clearly stronger that the people here are the embodiment of individual arts, and Parhalon the one bringing them to Ireland, thus their inventor. So we read in the footnotes to the version found in Keating's History of Ireland, quote, "The four names of Parhalon and Eibhir Finn's sons are, apparently, allegorical in both instances, and refer to the arts and institutions established in Ireland during its occupation by the Parhalonians and Everians, the memory of which has been thus enigmatically and succinctly preserved in Druidic Ran. I here give the meanings of these four words from O'Reilly's Irish Dictionary, viz. 1. Air, or ear, meaning head, adjective, great. 2. Orba, sub, inheritance, land patrimony. 3. Feran, or Feran, land, a farm, i.e. a distinct portion of land. 4. Fergna, chieftainship, seniority, and ergna, this is the same word without the digamma, meaning knowledge. The allegory then might mean that these sons born to Parhalon in Ireland were the laws and customs he established amongst the hunters and fishers he found dwelling in it. Viz. First, head, i.e. government. Second, inheritance of property. Third, distinct apportionment of land. Fourth, seniority or chieftainship, i.e. distinction of rank." Unquote. Then further, quote, "The names of Parhalon's husbandmen, etc., tend to confirm one as to the allegorical nature of the names of his followers. They are most of them ordinary Gaelic words and expressive of certain appropriate attributes, viz., amongst those husbandmen, tothacht, i.e. digging, ke, pot, trenchard, strength, and amongst the oxen are leg mhag, i.e. lay of the field, imari, i.e. ridge, and etheridge, i.e. furrow. The names of his three druids signify knowledge, information, and inquiry. The names of his merchants, Bibal and Bebal, would seem to point to the east, where he traded." Unquote. These individual craft representatives are not the inventor of all arts, yet Parhalon, their leader, canonically brings them all to Ireland for the first time. Then 4 of the primary sons, representing some of these things, are repeated as sons of Eibhir Finn, driving home and reinforcing this point. Plowing and digging, brewing and building, learning and inquiry, even religious practice are brought by Parhalon, and, matching the two aforesaid stories of Finn inventing methods of divination, Parhalon's people also bring a divinatory practice translated here alternately as sortilege and questioning. Via his 2 merchants, Parhalon is also shown to bring trade to Ireland, one merchant bringing gold and the other bringing cattle. Cattle husbandry, underpinning wealth, and the trade of these merchants is also brought by another of Parhalon's people. Thus, it can be definitively said that a very important pseudo-historical Finn-type hero is portrayed as bringing many of the arts to Ireland and also being the originator of trade and other mercantile things as well in Ireland. This then nearly perfectly matching the description of Caesar's Gaulish Mercury as inventor of arts, but also having the most influence on trade and money-making, almost paradoxically. When the Irish went to write of their pseudo-historical hero who brought trade and gold, among also numerous crafts, they chose to use a Finn-type hero. They are telling you who they saw as fit for Caesar's description. We then have Gaedhil Glas and his grandfather Fenius Farsyth, the inventors of the languages and scripts, and so absolutely crucial in our question about Mercury, who himself invents the letters by observing the flight of cranes. Gaedhil is the clearest euhemerized Fionn type between him and Fenius. As I've explained in my Samhain and Aillen the Burner video, please watch for the full evidence, Fionn mac Cumhaill drinking venom from a cup and then pressing the venom of his spear into his forehead in order to defeat Aillen, who is said to, quote, mix hazel mead, unquote, is the parallel of the myth where Shiva drinks the world poison emitted by his own snake, Vasuki, in order to neutralize it, after using the snake's body to turn the mountain that stirs the milk sea. In the Shiva myth, Shiva's throat famously turns blue where the poison touches it, with his consort stopping the poison with her hands before it can go further into him. Shiva is left with the well-known epithet Nila Kantha, meaning blue-throated. Gaedhil's story in comparison is that he is wrapped and bitten by a snake before Moses intervenes to make fervent prayer and place his staff on the snake bite, healing it. Moses reminding of Shiva's consort in the equivalent moment, placing her hands on Shiva's throat to stop the poison. A greenish ring is left on Gaedhil on his arms where the snake wrapped and bit him, thus giving him his epithet, Glas, meaning more or less green or blue. So, with the understanding that Fionn is thoroughly the Rudra Shiva type, and that he also has the full myth that parallels Shiva drinking the snake poison, during which Shiva's skin turns blue from where it touches his throat, we can easily triangulate this to Gaedhil Glas, and deduce that Gaedhil's story simply comes from an earlier shared root with the Fionn story. They are variant versions of one another, but each preserved different details of the original myth and emphasized different parts. Through this triangulation, we can see that Gaedhil is indeed another Rudra Shiva parallel, and indeed a coded Finn, with merely a variant of a myth type well established in Ireland in a different but still connected form, in the famous story of Fionn mac Cumhaill. Gaedhil being a Fionn/Rudra Shiva type seems further confirmed by his very name. Gaedhil is a back borrowing from an Old Welsh or Brythonic word, Gaedhil, meaning essentially woodsman, person of the woods, from Proto-Celtic Weidus, W-E-I-D-U-S, meaning wild. This Brythonic or Old Welsh word apparently came to mean Irishman, as if the interactions of the Brythonic people with the Irish in their territory caused them to see the Irish as woodsmen, people living in the woods. Perhaps their primary interaction with the Irish then was with Fianna bands and the like, and the word points back to those bands. In any case, the word was then borrowed into Irish as Gaedhil, and was used as a word by the Irish to describe themselves. We are the Gaedhils, which eventually becomes the Gaels. This amounts to saying we are the woods people, seeming to imply hunting and a relation to the wild. Regardless, it came to be one of the main words for the Irish or the Gaels that they adopted to refer to themselves. Furthermore, Gaedhil, the root Gaedhil, comes then from the very same root that gives us the names Gwydion and the Gaulish Widucus, aforementioned. The name of Gwydion, a Pushan type who is esoterically linked to the Rudra/Gwyn type, shares the root of his name with Gaedhil. But what is interesting is that in the Laur Gawala Erin pseudo-history, we have three names for the Gaelic people clustered together in this story. Gaedhil, his grandfather Fenius, and his mother Scota. The mother's name, Scota, is from Scotti, the Latin name for the Irish. Fenius is a Latinization of Feni, the native Irish word for the Irish themselves. So in this small cluster of three successive generations, we have the Welsh, Latin, and Irish words for the Irish people used as names. But even further, as linguist Eric P. Hamp argues in his article Gaedhil, Feni, Gwynedd, Feni too seems probably to come from the very same root as Gaedhil and Gaedhil. Hamp posits that the N in Feni was originally a D by a well-attested change, and the F is well understood to come from an earlier W and earlier U. So as Gaedhil comes from Wedeli, W-E-D-E-L-I, from Wedl, W-E-D-L, so Hamp says, quote, Feni reflects the absorption of D before N in early Celtic. Cf. Welsh Blwyddyn, Blynydd, from Bledani, Blydnias. Therefore, we have the possibility of reconstructing Weni coming from Wednioi. We are in the presence then of an IO stem, derivative of appurtenance taken from a stem comparable to Latin magnus or Welsh cwn, and these in turn built on the obliquus of the heteroclite. In short, wedl and wen are here nothing other at bottom than suppletive members of the same paradigmatic stem. In other words, wedl, the root of Gaedhil, and wedn, the root of Feni, are simply contextual shapes of the same thing. It is not surprising that they should have meant the same thing. They appear to have referred to the same thing, men of Ireland, unquote. And, quote, following our reasoning strictly, Wade H/N, the root of Feni, should have been close or nearly synonymous in meaning to Widhu, the root of Gaedhil and Gwydion. This would mean that Gwynedd was a collectivity of trees, forest, and Feni were those belonging to the woods or forest, also known as Waedheloi. This essentially makes Feni and Gaedhil near synonyms in Hamp's words, and seemingly even deriving from the same root as separate shapings of, quote, the same thing, unquote. So in Fenius and Gaedhil, we may have two versions of nearly the same name, one from native Irish and one from a borrowing of the Welsh equivalent. Perhaps more surprising, Hamp then argues that even the word Fianna, which also has the genitive form Fenia, which may come from this same root once again, and he shows in detail the path by which this may have occurred. Quote, let us return now to Fionn, feminine. If this is reconstructed as Wena from Waedhna, we see immediately that we can interpret this as an old collective of the thematization of the stem Waedhn. In fact, by applying the E vocalization rule for thematization, see 1984C, we may recover the expected obliquous stem, Widhn. The meaning of this collective Waedhna was then a group belonging to the woods or forest. But the derivation is morphologically independent of that of Feni, unquote. Now this is perhaps more disputed or uncertain, going by how Hamp frames it. However, when we look at Matasovic's etymological dictionary, a current standard in the field, we see that he claims that Fionn could come from another very closely related root, Wedu, meaning wild, or from one other, Wena, meaning troop, band of warriors, from Proto-Indo-European Wey, subscript 1, W-E-Y-H, subscript 1, meaning chase, pursue, or suppress. Matasovic appears to favor this latter etymology but leaves the question open. He then says, quote, these words are probably from the same PIE root as Proto-Celtic widu, wood, unquote, which is, of course, the crucial root discussed by Hamp. Thus, the PIE root widu, meaning woods, shared with Gaedhil and possibly with Feni, is one of two options that Matasovic mentions for the root of Fionn, the band of Fionn McCool, while yet calling this option an alternative etymology. Specifically, under the root wedu, meaning wild, he says, quote, another derivative from the same Proto-Celtic root could be Middle Irish Fionn, denoting a troop of young warriors and brigands. It could be derived from Waidna, see McCone 1987, but an alternative etymology derives it from Proto-Celtic, Wena, see below, unquote. Alongside the etymology of Fionn from this latter root Wena, meaning troop or chase, he then immediately mentions that, quote, the Irish ethnonym Feni is probably related, unquote. Thus, he too directly connects Feni, the root of Fenius, and Fionn, the word for the band of Fionn McCool, etymologically. Electronic Dictionary of Irish Online, Gaedhil, also says that D.A. de Jubanvie and Thurnieson likewise connected Fionn with the people name Feni. So in sum, Matasovic connects Feni directly to Fionn by saying they are probably related, and derives Fionn from either the same PIE root as Gaedhil or a different one meaning to chase. Both Matasovic and Hamp seem to be agreeing that Feni is related to Fionn, full stop, but using different favored roots. De Jubanvie and Thurnieson agree with this main connection. Matasovic and Hamp also agree that Fionn could come from the same root as Gaedhil, either as the first or second option, and both reinforce how interconnected these different roots were in practice. So if we take this information and apply it to Gaedhil and Fenius, we can see that Gaedhil's name connects him directly with Gwydion/Mercury Witticus etymologically, and with the theme of living in the woods like a hunter and perhaps being wild. Gaedhil possibly can share a root with the Fionn troop itself, but this is unclear and disputed. Fenius's name then also seems probably related to the word for the Fionn troop, according to both scholars, who don't connect it to any other coincidental sound-alike roots. The other noted scholars seem to agree. Fenius may even come from the same root as Gaedhil itself, according to Hamp's argument, being merely a different shaping of that root and resulting in essentially a synonym of Gaedhil as well. So with this, we can make a strong case that Gaedhil and possibly Fenius can be related by their names to a Gwyn aspect in the aforementioned Gwydion, to the themes directly relevant to the Gwyn/Fionn type, that is, being men of the woods and the wilds, to the Fianna band itself, the domain of Fionn, and lastly, and maybe most importantly, that their names appear to be variant synonyms or cognates from a single root, that they are unquestionably two names used to call the Irish or Gaelic people, and thus that they might be hypothesized as mythic doubles of one another in some sense yet to be explored. This leaps out as a plausible hypothesis to take away from the information thus far gathered. Fenius's name as direct and connected synonym of Gaedhil suggests he could be his double or higher self, doubled for some narrative purpose. Fenius is grandfather of Gaedhil, but we have seen instances where a higher Rudra or Fionn type fathers or grandfathers his own lower self in some way. First to mind would be the wandering Vratya of the Atharva Veda, who is the higher Rudra Agni, catalyzing Prajapati to engender the gold from within himself, which grows into the reborn Vratya, who is then Mahadeva Rudra. This makes the higher wandering Vratya Rudra sort of like a grandfather or indirect father to his lower reborn self through the intermediary of Prajapati. This theme also plays out, as I've explained, with Cumhaill, who fathers Fionn via the daughter of Taig. Here, Cumhaill is in the position of the higher wandering Vratya Rudra, and the daughter of Taig is in the place of the female aspect of the Prajapati, that Prajapati being off to the side as her father Taig. The Mahadeva Rudra type god Fionn is born from this, and so we have technically Cumhaill fathering his lower self in Fionn, and both are the Rudra, with Taig and his daughter as the intermediaries a bit more displaced in this version. Aeroswith similarly seems to be the Cumhaill type who fathers Efnisien and Nisian as the reborn Rudra and Shiva types in that case. See my The Birth of Fionn MacCool, the secret heart of the creation myth video for how this works exactly. So we know different variations of such a pattern can happen. A Celtic Rudra as paternal figure to his own reborn self. Thus I propose that unless Fenius is just a doubling of Gaedhil for a more fabricated narrative purpose within the pseudo-history, which is also possible, that he could represent this embedded concept of the paternal and the reborn Finn types. We also have Indhui, who under the epithet Indhui Foltfind, the wise white-haired one, is an obvious codename of the famously white-haired Finn, who is connected with wisdom and knowledge, with Finn's name indeed preserved in the epithet Foltfind itself. And Indhui is the grandson of Tat, meaning father. Between Tat and Indhui is Aldhui, meaning great ignorant. Between Fenius and Gaedhil, on the other hand, is Fenius' son, Nel, which could mean cloud/mist. I've proposed that Aldhui, the intermediate between Tat the father and Indhui the wise, may represent the concept of the veil of ignorance, which intervenes to break the unity of the absolute, and that Tat, father, and Tat's parent, Tavarn, meaning ocean, are two faces of the absolute, something like male and female or personal and impersonal. After the unity of Tat the father, the great ignorance arises, Aldhui. Then Indhui, the wise, arises and supersedes him and pierces through that ignorance as the embodiment of wisdom and indeed of the rising divine mind, which then shapes the post-unity world and presumably seeds the arts and the crafts from that knowledge. If Nel means cloud or mist, there is the possibility that it could stand for this intervening veil, a cloud of unknowing that follows after the father Rudra or Finn type, who is Fenius, and then is overcome by Nel's son, who is the rebirth of Fenius, but divided from the unity of the previous absolute by the cloud or veil of ignorance that came between. It may be pertinent in this that their story surrounds the confusion of languages and the overcoming of that confusion, as Fenius helps construct the Tower of Babel, which could stand for the moment of unity in the absolute. The first recension of the Laur Gawala Aaron says, quote, Fenius Farsaith, it is he who was one of the 72 chieftains who went for the building of Nimrod's tower, whence the languages were dispersed. Fenius came out of Asia to Scythia, whence he had gone for the building of the tower. Unquote. Nel is a master of all the languages, and in some other versions goes to the tower after its destruction to study the confusion of the languages, which then could mark the moment of confusion or cloud of ignorance. And then his son, Gaedhil, seemingly concludes the process by producing the perfected Gaelic language, in this version by himself, and in others with Fenius or even with Nel. Again, whether or not this is the meaning of Nel, it is clear that there are multiple reasons why Fenius might be a grandfatherly double of Gaedhil, including the possibility that they are names woven together from variant traditions, or that the authors of the pseudo-history wanted to have all three names for the Irish represented at the origin point of the language, and that's all. In other versions, Fenius does not help build the tower, but only comes after it to study the languages and direct the production of the perfected languages. And this seems to be because the author thought the timeline didn't work, or that they didn't want to associate Fenius with building this negatively associated tower. Nel is also often noted for his knowledge, and in one very arresting passage is called Envenomed Nel. Is Nel then yet another Rudra aspect, like the envenomed Vasuki, who produces the world poison, is really part of Shiva that he has to overcome? Or like Aeroswith himself, has a serpent-like name, Gold Enemy, and he and Fachtana Fahak could represent the serpent aspect of the higher Rudra, as I've shown how Fachtana Fahak is equivocated with a serpent. It's fascinating that Gaedhil Glas is bitten by a serpent, while his father is called envenomed, and this shouldn't be entirely set aside. Nothing in his story suggests Nell is merely bitter about anything. So assuming this word envenomed is a figurative adjective merely in this context seems questionable. Is the defeat of Aillen by Fionn, as Aillen puts everyone to sleep with his music, and the swallowing of the venom of Vasuki by Shiva in the parallel moment, is this myth type an afterimage of the primordial Rudra type god overcoming the veil of ignorance, like the music of Aillen, as Indwi supersedes Aldwi, or as Gaedhil goes out beyond envenomed Nell, who stays immersed in the confusion at the tower? Is this why Gaedhil has the story paralleling those stories of Finn and Shiva? Alternately, cloud could point to Nuadha, since the Welsh cognate Niamh came to mean clouds or mist, and we could envision a Finn type fathering a Nuadha who fathers a Finn, reminding us of the image of the fishing for the salmon of knowledge. Fintan is the pre-existing origin of the knowledge, as the fish. Finn Ekes, aka Nuadha, is there finding and catching the fish. Young Fionn is there eating the fish and gaining all the knowledge. Fintan also appears as an ancestor of Nuadha, who is then great-grandfather of Fionn in the story Cath Cumhaill. In the case of Odin, we see him split into three at one point in Gylfaginning, high, just as high, and third, in a vertical orientation. And who knows but Gaedhil, Nell, and Fenius could even be such a vertical trio of Finns coming one after the other. Any such pattern or a different variation might underlie what we see with Fenius as grandfather of Gaedhil. In any case, the most important thing here is that we can see what Gaedhil and Fenius do in their story regarding the creation of the languages is very much overlapping and collaborative between them, and details of who does what even shift between them in the variant versions, which can reinforce the idea that they are doubles in some obscure way. The overlapping of their role might be summed up by what is said in the first redaction of the Laur Gawala Erin. Fenius is said to be, quote, Fenius aforesaid, who brought the people's speech from the tower, and it is he who had the great school, learning the multiplicity of languages, unquote. But then, quote, it is Gaedhil Glas who fashioned the Gaelic language out of the 72 languages, the tally of languages, without tarnish, out of which Gaedhil cut Gaedhilic, unquote. A summary of most of the main overlapping variant traditions regarding the invention of Gaelic and the other languages and scripts is something like this. The creator of the languages. We have Gaedhil Glas alone in the Laur Gawala Erin first redaction, in the manner just quoted. We have Fenius Farsyth alone in the Laur Gawala third redaction, and in most Arya Sept, aka the Scholar's Primer, passages. We have Fenius plus Er plus Gaedhil, son of Ether, jointly in one Arya Sept passage. We have Gaedhil, son of Eathor, under Fenius's orders in Geoffrey Keating, explicitly rejecting Gaedhil Glas and replacing him with Gaedhil, son of Eathor. Next, the person after whom the language is named. We have Gaedhil Glas in the Laur Gawala Erin older strata. We have Gaedhil, son of Ether, or Eingen, in the Arya Sept and most scholarly tradition. And we have Gaedhil, son of Eathor, in Keating in the 17th century correction to the tradition. Then we have the inventor of the Ogham, or the Beth Lewis Nin script. Here we have three incompatible claims in the same manuscript tradition of the Scholar's Primer plus the Ogham tract. We have Fenius Farsyth as this inventor, as the crowning achievement of his linguistic work. Then we have Oma as the inventor in the standard mythological claim in the dedicated Ogham tract, which is found in the same manuscript with the Arya Sept, aka Scholar's Primer. And finally we have Avergin, son of Mill, as the inventor of the Ogham, invented in Ireland after the Milesian invasion. Next, we have the figure who discovers or invents 4 alphabets or scripts, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, along with the Beth Lewis Nin of the Ogham. Fenius invents the 5 divisions of poetic registers of Gaelic, indirectly by commanding Gaedhil, son of Eathor. And then we have Fenius plus Gaedhil in Keating, who sends his poetic school throughout the world in the Ogham tract, note that some of these registers are connected to poetic prophecy, as might be expected, and thus they obliquely remind of the runes, as of course do the Oghams themselves. So in short, the medieval Irish sources themselves disagree on almost every point, and we repeatedly see Fenius and Gaedhil overlapping, with some statements saying Gaedhil invented Gaelic, others that Fenius did, and others that Gaedhil does so under Fenius's direction, so that they seem to collaborate in the work in these instances. It almost seems plausible that Fenius was supposed to be the genius behind all the languages originally, and Gaedhil to be the narrowed genius of Gaelic alone who perfected or enacted it, and so it became hard to disentangle which of them invented or fashioned that language at first, and whether Gaedhil only was its perfecter or first user or mere namesake, etc. Either way, it shows intense overlap of Fenius with Gaedhil, and right on this key Mercury-type issue, the invention of both the languages and the alphabets and writing scripts, along with the poetic registers, which are then connected also to prophecy. Who invents the letters as Mercury did, and the languages along with them? This is a big question. Seemingly two overlapping Finn types with synonymous cognate names. It's interesting that Averkin is also mentioned as inventing the Ogham alphabet at one point, as this shows a known Shiva type being attributed with this invention. Thus, it can't be said to only belong to the Oma type, and this allows us to posit that Oma is a more specialized, lower god connected to the Ogham role, of course, and the bardic knowledge related to it. As I've mentioned before, Oma is like Bragi, the Gandharva or court bard god. And so Bragi's relation to Odin, his father, may be like Oma's relation to the Finn/Averkin or Rudra Shiva type. Oma is a narrowed specialist of the bardic craft and script, therefore identified with it in a narrow sense. But we also know that Odin is called Bragi, meaning general bard or poet, as if he embodies the same bardic divine role on the higher level. It's possible that this can explain why Oma, the bard among the gods, overlaps with Averkin and Fenius in the claimed invention of the Ogham. It would make much less sense to assume that Fenius's invention of Ogham would make him the more narrow Oma type. Rather, we should assume that he must be one of the higher gods, since he is grandparent of the Finn type figure Gaedhil. And so seeing Fenius's relation to Oma as equivalent to how Odin subsumes the Bragi name and role appears to be the more consistent conclusion, which also best accounts for Averkin, Finn's other face, also being attributed with this particular invention. Who are the Irish telling us is their letter-inventing, Mercury-esque god then? If we mind the sources, they are strong in one direction. This should conclude the mythic and pseudo-historical inventors of arts and related customs in our sources. All or nearly all of the main figures who do these things are clearly a part of or are esoterically connected to the larger high god Finn/Gwyn. Now, one might counter that these pseudo-historical instances, as powerful as they are only given the invention of arts and customs because of the genre of founding stories that they happen to have been placed in. Anyone in their place would be the inventor of things because they happen to be the first on the scene of Ireland, and these are only late fabricated pseudo-histories anyway, so they can't tell us the original mythic role of a given god type. But this is part of the point. When the Gaels went to compose their pseudo-histories and set down their pseudo-historical founder figures and culture heroes, they repeatedly chose clearly encoded Finn types to fill these roles, from Parhalon to Gaedhil to Fenius to Fintan, and on to Averfin and Averkin as well. On the other hand, there is no clear instance of a Lu type, for example, that they chose for an equivalent major founding culture hero. The incredible domination of this genre and culture hero type by Finn-type figures, almost to the exclusion of other types, is damning for alternate candidates for the inventor of all arts role in Celtic mythology. when the Gaels went to set down, in their pseudo-history though it may be, who indeed invented all of their arts and customs, by their own account, they simply chose Finn, and then even went to pains to multiply him under different guises so that he could fill the role from all possible angles. Or on the other hand, they may have had multiple variant traditions from different sources in Ireland who, when brought together, all happened to agree on the fact that a Finn type of some sort was the inventor of arts or languages. However you envision these variant strands coming together, the agreement on this point in the resulting picture speaks volumes about who the inventor of the arts, customs, and languages was seen to be in the Gaelic tradition of the time. We must remember that these pseudo-histories were actually very important to the Gaels who wrote them, and some of the authors appear to have been the chief poets of all Ireland at the time, deeply immersed in and epitomizing the bardic tradition that brought the surviving myths down from the preceding ages. The inventions of the various arts, according to my analysis, would then be poetry, Fionn, Taliesin, Efnisien, Averchin, from different angles. The 5 poetic registers of Gaelic, or the 5 divisions of the poet's language, either Fenius or Gaedhil, or just Fenius. The prophetic poetic technique Imhas Voroshnai, Fionn. The prophetic poetic technique Digital do Chenav, Fionn or Averchin. The prophetic poetic technique Tem Laida, Fionn. Tree branch divination, comparable to rune divination, Fionn. Along with this, who has the story that is from the same root as the story of Odin grasping the runes while fasting on the tree, Fionn. A method of divination translated as sortilege and questioning, one of Parhalon's men. The 4 alphabets or scripts, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and the Beth, Lugus, Nin of the Ogham, Fenius. Alternately, Oma or Averchin are said to invent the Ogham. The Gaelic language, Fenius or Gaedhil, or both together. And who has the story that is from the same root as Odin retrieving the mead of poetry so that poets can have inspiration? Finn mac Kinnelly. Who embodies knowledge primordially and so could be seen as a source of knowledge and all things that flow from it, the principle or basis of invention itself? Fintan. Brewing, building, farming, mercantile trade, suretyship, cattle husbandry, making or cooking with cauldrons, plowing, digging, hospitality, oblation, prayer, divination, druidic knowledge and inquiry, government, inheritance of property, apportionment of land, and distinction of rank. These are all brought by Parhalon. By the argument that Odin, Heinir, and Lother, or the alternate names Odin, Vili, and Ve, are really 3 aspects of one god on the creation scene, and that the triple-faced Rudra Shiva Agni performs the same myth type as Odin and his brothers by attacking the embodied sky in the creation myth, we can deduce that an understanding of these 3 aspects as 3 sides of the Rudra-type god was a Proto-Indo-European understanding. So then, when we see 3 brothers in both the Welsh and Irish stories that directly parallel the Norse and Vedic trios, we can strongly argue that the Celts also had an understanding of the 3 brothers being 3 aspects of one god from the start. By this argument, we can see that Manawyddan, aka Manannán, is the 3rd brother on the creation myth scene, and thus that he is an aspect, along with Efnisien and Nisien, of the god Gwyn ap Nudd. The fire aspect was always already seen as one side of the Rudra-type god, even in the Celtic sphere. By more extended argumentation, we can see that Manawyddan/Manannán is the fire god, thus perfectly paralleling the Agni aspect of Rudra Shiva Agni, and also Lother in the equivalent spots. Thus, the saddle-making, shoemaking, and shield-making that Manawydan does can be reasonably added to the tally of Gwyn/Finn's stories about originating arts. He is part of this same larger god. Manannán's connection to smithing and crafting support this. Gwydion is emblematic of skilled trade and eloquence, as well as transformative enchantment and illusion magic, though the case for him originating these is not very strong. Even as a late adopter, Gwydion still is not as late as Lle. Gaulish Mercury names. Gaelic and Welsh texts aside, we can actually look at the Gaulish evidence of the kinds of gods that were syncretized with, that were called, Mercury by the Romano-Gauls. What kinds of Gaulish gods do we have under the actual name of Mercury in surviving engravings and the like? Just as the many scattered code names of Finn can be seen as misleading to interpreters who aren't aware of their underlying unity, so also we have to consider that the many names of the Gaulish Mercury may also be scattered names of the one god pointed to by Caesar, and so we have to attempt to see which single god all or at least most of the names might fit most harmoniously, as if they were aspects of that one type. This hypothesis at least has to be attempted. First, as mentioned, we have Mercury Widicus, meaning of the woods, with one inscription, who most overtly and clearly connects to an insular Celtic god, and it is Gwydion, while as aforesaid, the root of his name connects to the root of the name Gaedhil, and possibly Fenius as well, and also possibly the word Fianna, the warband of Fionn himself. Mercury Vesutius. This means either of the ravens or knowledgeable, depending on the etymology, and is found in 10 to 11 dedicatory inscriptions, making it one of the most prominent and important couple of Gaulish Mercury names in the surviving evidence. Thus, it's incredibly noteworthy that the name connects to such specifically Odinic things as either ravens or knowledge, suggesting we should be looking for the Celtic equivalent of the Odin type. As for the direct Celtic connection, Fionn is the embodiment of all knowledge as described as the salmon of knowledge, Fintan, and as Fionn who eats the salmon, and we also have a figure in the Finn tales named Fiacha, which means raven, and which would come from the same Celtic word as Vesutius if raven is the correct etymology. Fiacha equals Vesutius in one scenario. This Fiacha mac Cumhaill is the foster father and uncle by marriage of Fionn mac Cumhaill, and is arguably the main paternal figure in Fionn's life, considering that his biological father, Cumhaill, died before his birth. He's almost like a replacement father in that sense. Cumhaill was Finn's higher self, a double of the same god type ultimately, as I've shown. Could his replacement father, Fiacha, play a similar role in other parts of the tradition? Fiacha is also a Fenid leader, a Fianna leader, like Cumhaill and Fionn, already bringing him closely into the Fionn/Rudra domain of figures, and Fiacha gives Fionn the afterward famous spear, Björgha, the spear that never is thrown a missing throw, and that thus directly parallels Odin's never-missing spear, Gungnir. Now, for one thing, we could picture Fiacha as Fionn's higher self giving himself his legendary spear in the esoteric narrative, just as Fionn eats the wisdom of his own higher self, Fintan, in the Salmon of Knowledge, guided by another Finn, Finnecus. Or as the Hawk of Aillen is born and dies in the same days as Fintan and plucks Fintan's eye out, thus paralleling Odin plucking his own eye out, and this suggesting that the hawk could be an aspect of Fintan himself plucking out his own eye likewise. And again, Fiacha's role could be like how Fionn's father Cumhaill is yet again Fionn's higher self, as said, giving rise to him, and how his rival, Gael, is his own more terrible side, on the divine level at least. All faces of the Rudra god playing out a winking sort of esoteric narrative mythos, completely unbothered by the continual multiplying of the faces of the one god Finn in order to express his multifarious esoteric theology. That multiplication apparently is part of Finn's special nature and part of the message. So Fiacha, replacing the dead Cumhaill as Fionn's father figure who provides him his weapon, might signal that he is only Fionn's higher self once again, doubled for the sake of the narrative being related. In another tale, Fiacha and Fionn have a foot race, finishing at the same time, which could also signal their underlying equivalence. If Fionn is already seen to be the in-depth one-to-one parallel of Odin, the raven god, as I've shown, then there's no reason to think that Fionn, as a total deity, shouldn't be the one connected to ravens by that parallel alone. Another angle to consider would be that Fiacha, the foster father leaning over Fionn's shoulder, so to speak, to aid him, could be a humanized parallel of the ravens on Odin's shoulders, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. So perhaps Fiacha is an extension of Fionn, like his own thought or memory that he can draw on for help, manifesting his eternal spear from out of his own divine thought, drawing it from out of his cosmic memory. In the Norse case, the ravens are indeed extensions of Odin as his own thought and memory are. While Odin isn't called simply Raven, he is called both Raven God, Hrafnaguð, Hrafnaas, and Raven Tester, Hrafnafreistúðr, as well as Gothi of the Raven Offering, and the appropriateness of these names to Odin is obvious, as he would clearly be the Raven God, along with everything else that he is. Thus, since Fiacha is a Fianna man, and clearly is not Lu or another rival candidate, it seems by far the best read available to say that he is some aspect of Fionn, and that Fionn as a total deity, including Fiacha, would be the direct parallel of Visuchius. And that equation stands whether Visuchius means knowledgeable, the domain of Fionn, or raven, also a closely connected thing. Fiachna, a variation on the same word as Fiacha, is also a son of Fionn by Gall MacMorna's sister in the story The Hostel of the Quicken Trees, making another close link of this name type to Fionn. And another figure named Fiachna gives Fionn a fast black horse, echoing the previous Fiacha giving him his spear. Fionn is fairly surrounded by ravens, just as Odin is. And also, sons of Fionn and grandsons, like Oscar, are often seen to be sorts of continuations of him, as also Oshin is a continuation of Fionn. So then, Fiachna may represent this same thing. Gwyn ap Nudd is directly associated with ravens, and very heavily so, in his dialogue with Gwyddno Garanhir. Gwyn is the one who is there when ravens are doing their work of feeding on the battle slain. So, the presence of Gwyn and the presence of the ravens are intimately linked here. And the speaker here is Gwyn himself. Quote, "I have been in the place where was killed Gwendolew, and son of Caida, the pillar of songs, when the ravens screamed over blood. I have been in the place where Bran was killed, the son of Gwerid, of far extending fame, when the ravens of the battlefield screamed. I have been where Llachau was slain, the son of Arthur, extolled in songs, when the ravens screamed over blood. I have been where Merig was killed, the son of Carayan, of honorable fame, when the ravens screamed over flesh." Unquote. This is from the dialogue of Gwyn and Gwyddno Garanhir. We again picture Gwyn surrounded by these ravens as he watches over the bloody battles. What is interesting is that the Irish hawk of Achill is the one who seems to do the same sort of thing that these Welsh ravens do, and we have pointed out how the hawk appears very much like an aspect of Fintan, because the hawk is the one who plucks out the eye of Fintan, just as Odin plucks his own eye out. It is the hawk here in this Irish monologue who feeds greedily on the battle slain. So hawk and raven run together in the parallel traditions and take similar roles, and both birds are tied respectively to Fintan and to Gwyn, with Fintan also turning into a hawk himself at one stage. The hawk, in what is like a blend of Gwyn's speech that we have just seen with the ravenous raven role, says, quote, "By his treachery, Curoy, king of Clan Degath, fell, and I ate my fill of the blood of his witch blood. Then Garv, son of Starn, fell to the hound who fed scald crows. 2 eyes of the handsome Greek I ate at the beginning of that good day. Also it was often I got flesh and spoils from Naishi, who was venomous of weapon. But I did not taste his flesh or blood because of his excellence in fighting. The head of Ket fell to me after his wounding and his struggle. It was for me a desperate mouthful. His eyes were like to choke me. I ate. Enormous was his size, the body of Monothar mac Cecht. I found many bodies back to back from the victorious hand of Cumhaill. From the strife he did not flinch so long as he was alive. The rivers used to run bloody from the Culgash spear of Cumhaill the victorious." Unquote. Hopefully it is clear that the hawk of Achill is playing the same role that the ravens are playing in the dialogue of Gwyn, but at the same time the hawk is speaking like Gwyn himself was speaking as this spirit of battle, thus blending these roles together into this hawk. When we trace this name type in saints' lives, some striking parallels crop up. We have in the life of Saint Mochuda of Lismore a Saint Fiachna, who is also called Factana. Quote, "Mochuda had in his monastery 12 exceedingly perfect disciples, including Factana Conken, Fiachna or Fiocra." Unquote. So this Factana is called aka Fiachna. We have seen that Factana Fahak, the hostile wise as his name says, can be solidly interpreted as a Finn/Rudra hero. Though but a fragment, this saint's life does tie the name Fiachna to another more relatively solid Finn-type name within the Irish tradition, and add on the surname Conken or Doghead for good measure. The raven name Fiachna is thus equated with the dog-headed hostile one. These all seem to be Fionn-type names. One relevant Irish saint, and he is probably not the only one, appears in his legend to actually be an encoded Rudra/Finn type. Yet, he has a name that is a variation of Fiacha. His myths show him to be Finn/Rudra. His name is a variation of Fiacha. This then connects him to one etymology of Vesutius more directly, and directly connects the Fiacha name to a recognizable Finn/Rudra mythos, supporting the idea that Finn and Fiacha are indeed part of one larger deity mythos, and that Fiacha is like a byname of the same Finn-type god. And thank you to Cathal, or rather Cumhaill, for pointing out this saint and his incredible Rudra-type plague-sending and depopulation mythos. Wikipedia explains Saint Faichin's name. Quote, "It has been suggested that his name translates as little raven, consisting of the Old Irish noun fiach, raven, and a diminutive suffix. His name is explained in this manner in a note added to the Failure Oingeso, which says that he received this name when his mother saw him gnawing on a bone and exclaimed, 'My little raven, mo fiachan,' unquote. Thus, his name does appear to come from a variation of Fiacha, matching directly the possible root of Vesutius. Saint Faichin has a story that is strongly reminiscent of a known Rudra role, both in bringing illness and bringing death to compassionately lower the population. We see this classic theme also in the Sumerian Rudra parallel, Enlil, divider of earth and sky, and thus equivalent of Cronus, when he brings about the cataclysmic flood, in part to reduce the population in the Sumerian myth. Thus, this can be called a classic Rudra-type role. Efnisien also effectively institutes true death when he self-sacrifices to destroy the cauldron that regenerates the dead warriors during the war, showing this sort of thing to consistently be part of the Rudra type's compassionate duty toward the world, and part of his mythos. The story about Fionn and the plague he helps bring, according to Wikipedia, quote, is found both in the Latin Life of Saint Gerald of Mayo and in the notes to the hymn Shen De by Colman of the Macu Cluisig in the Liber Hymnorum. It relates that the joint high kings Diarmid mac Aidho Slania and Blamac mac Aidho Slania appealed to Fionn and other churchmen, asking them to inflict a terrible plague on the lower classes of society, and so decrease their number. Fionn was one of the churchmen to answer their request and to perish in the event, whereas Gerald kept aloof and survived." Unquote. Stella Cromrish in The Presence of Shiva describes the myth in which the destroyer god Rudra helps the creator Brahma regulate the overpopulation of the earth Brahma has caused by compassionately instituting death and also rebirth as an alternative to burning the entire world or allowing it to be a hell of unregulated beings suffering from their numerousness. Quote, "Creation-destruction and then the pause before a new life begins on earth are ordained by Brahma, but they are willed by Rudra Shiva, the compassionate, who himself is beyond time, a motionless pillar, Sthanu. Shiva, throughout this myth of the introduction of recurrent deaths and renewed lives of man and of the cosmos, acts as Sthanu. When Brahma's progeny increased out of bounds and he could not regulate its growth, a holocaust seemed the only remedy. The creator in his anger was about to burn his deathless progeny. Its incalculable increase had already overwhelmed the three worlds. Rudra, moved by pity for the victims of Brahma's unchecked productivity, directed the wrath of Brahma away from the scheme of destruction. And Brahma fulfilled the request of Rudra not to let the universe end in an irreparable cataclysm. Brahma consented to let life go on in living beings to the appointed time, when it would be withdrawn from them, and after a pause, they would return in other bodies until their time came to leave this world. This movement would go on till doomsday, when the entire universe would be destroyed and lie in dark quiescence, until a new aeon would arise in the dawn of a new cosmos. Rudra, the ineffective guardian of the uncreate, acted as the protector of creation. He unraveled the proliferating mass of Brahma's helpless progeny by letting the creatures move along the river of time, with its waves surging and subsiding, and the lives of the people flowing along through periods of activity and quiescence." Unquote. Quote, "Brahma, however, was adamant about death's cosmic necessity. Rudra, Brahma, and the young, compassionate, and blameless goddess finally cooperated in bringing death into the world. Rudra allotted to death its position in the order of cyclical time. Death would be the open gate through which the current of time would take its course. Brahma had to be relentless in his insistence on the necessity of death. He knew what the world had been without it. Rudra brought the cyclical sequence of time into the cosmos as a remedy. Brahma summoned death from within himself to make the remedy effective, to keep intact the order of the cosmos. Brahma's progeny trod the earth and exceeded the bounds of space and time. The earth was about to be overrun by their throng, and there was no limit to the continuation of such a predicament. The immortality of his crowd was a state of deprivation. Mankind lacked death. Brahma started a holocaust, and Sthanu, the motionless, moved by pity, diverted the cataclysm. Contrary to his original intention, he cooperated with Brahma in making bearable the human condition. He did this by offering the prospect of an eternal return, in accordance with which each death would lead to another life." Unquote. As Fionn specifically sends plague in his story, Cromrish also describes how fever is born from Shiva in other tales. Quote, "At the request of Brahma, this fearful creature Virabhadra was made to wander over the earth and was named Fever, the dreadful energy of Mahadeva. Shiva distributed it in the earth as bitumen of the mountains, as a throat disease of horses, as a bilious attack in everyone, as hiccups of parrots, and in many other pains in which it was to enter tigers, men, and Vritra, the cosmic serpent." See Mahabharata 12.274.23 through 56. "Because fever is the dreadful energy of Shiva, none but Shiva can remove it." Unquote. Cromrish also mentions another version. Quote, "When Shiva heard of Sati's death, he tore out a bunch of his matted hair and threw it angrily at the top of the mountain. From his breath 100 fevers were born." Shiva Purana 2.2.32.20 and 24. Unquote. One form of Shiva is Jvarahareshvara, meaning the Lord who seizes with fever heat. Apollo, Rudra's equivalent, also famously begins the Iliad by sending plague onto the host of the Achaeans, setting in motion the events of the epic. So, sending disease is a deeply established and well-known Rudra-type role, and goes along with the role of helping to reduce population by instituting death in a compassionate cycle. One possibly relevant story listed on St. Fionn's Wikipedia page says, quote, "When Fionn felt aggrieved over the reward he received for herding the oxen of Ciaran of Clonmacnoise, he left in anger, going eastward. When he was called back, he refused to return with his face before him, and so walked backwards instead, hence the name. In Jewish and Old Testament eschatology, a backslider is a polytheist." Unquote. This can be read to parallel the Daksha's sacrifice myth I've gone in depth explaining in my Kernunos video, where Shiva is excluded from having a share of the sacrifice, and so he at first stays away from the sacrifice, and then is induced to violently destroy it. In the conclusion, his wife having killed herself in the drama, Shiva goes to the wilds in a sort of self-imposed exile that we see paralleled, for instance, in Odin's self-imposed exile after Frigg has brought shame on him in the parallel story in Saxo Grammaticus. So St. Fionn is aggrieved for not being given a proper share of reward, as with the sacrificial share of Shiva, and has this back and forth of exclusion and angry reapproach like Shiva does as well. It's interesting that Fionn is implied to be a religious backslider or even polytheist here, because proper worship is the theme of the Daksha sacrifice story type. Both sides accuse the other of improper worship, essentially. For instance, in the version found in the Shahnameh, Zal has a falling out with the father of his future wife, who would then be the Daksha here, specifically over proper worship. Zal calling him an idolater, and him thinking Zal a faithless wretch in return. In what seems to be an Amorite version of the story type, Martu, their Shiva type, is accused of being one who, quote, "eats what Nana forbids and does not show reverence, an abomination to the gods' dwellings, cannot properly recite prayers. He lives in the mountains and ignores the places of gods." Unquote. Of course, I've shown how this exact story type relating to Daksha's sacrifice, possibly even with the Indian version as the source, is the story underpinning the golden calf sacrifice scene of Exodus. So the dispute over idolatry versus true worship is the theme this story more or less always revolves around, and we see St. Fionn here being labeled with a name that pins him symbolically as an idolatrous backslider, similar to the accusations cast on other Rudra types. Fionn and Rudra also have a separate story type about how they are unhappy with what they have received in patrimony after their births, so they go and demand certain dominions from Taig and Prajapati, respectively. Thus, this story of Fionn, too, has strong Finn/Rudra themes and specific motifs. Additionally, healing abilities were attributed to Fionn, with holy wells being dedicated to him. An old holy well in his monastic community on Omi Island is apparently a pilgrimage site for those seeking a cure for all ailments, such as blindness, polypus, fevers, and tumors/fistula. Rudra is a healer, as what he inflicts, only he can truly heal. This paradoxical duality of disease and healing is one of the signatures of Rudra, and so it is remarkable to see Fionn fulfilling it to the full. Another story of Fionn is worth examining, with a caveat for the speculative nature of the parallel. Quote, "There is a mill at Fur in Meath, which Saint Fionn made most miraculously with his own hands in the side of a certain rock. No women are allowed to enter either this mill or the church of the saint, and the mill is held in as much reverence by the natives as any of the churches dedicated to the saint. It happened that when Hugh de Lacy was leading his troops through this place, an archer dragged a girl into the mill and there violated her. Sudden punishment overtook him, for being struck with internal fire in the offending parts, it spread throughout his whole body, and he died the same night." Unquote. It seems possible to read our Rudraic creation theme into this story in compacted form. The tower is the unbroken absolute, which is also reflected later in Shiva as Sthanu, the tranquil and stable pillar himself, his meditative form which refuses sexual reproduction, even severing his own phallus at this time. This general theme could connect to the prohibition against women in the tower. The same theme is there in the creation myth, as Shiva is the guardian of the unbroken state of the absolute, symbolized by the pillar, here reflected as a mill. This means no sexual congress is to take place in this creation moment, because this will break the integrity of the absolute and spill the sacred liquid. Rudra Shiva seeks to defend this and stop this from happening. So when Prajapati does so by indeed raping his daughter, this breaks the wholeness of that absolute, and a violent reaction of Rudra immediately is unleashed against Prajapati to try to stop his act and also effectively to punish it. But as we have said, and as we see played out in Cumhaill's version of this myth, the Rudra Agni actually incites and catalyzes this act of rape and its outcome. That is the understood esoteric core of the story, by being the fire of inflammation in Prajapati and also preparing the sap or seed within him in some way. Thus, the esoteric truth is that Rudra Agni, acting in Prajapati, who is just a passive sight of this passion, has brought this all about, and Rudra Agni has then reacted against it to stop and punish it. When Rudra Agni in the Rig Veda prepares the liquid for Father Heaven and then attacks him in a recreation of the same myth, he is called here the Archer. Therefore, the Archer in the story of Fionn, who takes a woman into the mill and violates her, could well be the Rudra Agni equivalent to Cumhaill impregnating Myrnia, while the reaction of deadly infernal fire that immediately comes upon him and his offending parts would be the reaction of the Rudra Agni, who turns and attacks the violating sexual act specifically, this being Gall MacMorna's role in the story of Cumhaill. With this framework in mind, it's possible to see that a core Rudra or Finn-type myth has once again been encoded in another story of Saint Fionn. Now, if that myth as a whole seems too esoteric to be encoded here, it can be disregarded while still appreciating that Rudraic themes seem to dominate this story, with the rapist being punished by fire in his offending parts at the mill of Fionn, just as Rudra punishes the rapists Prajapati and Dyaush, and Gaul punishes the unlawful wife-taker Cumhaill with his attendant army. The mill that Fionn builds himself, where no women are allowed, is a perfect symbol of Rudra's ascetic self-removal from procreation, as when he severs his own phallus and becomes this motionless pillar, Sthanu, or when he guards the pillar of the Absolute from sexual outflows of the sacred liquid, the Absolute being symbolized as the Skamba pillar, of course. The mill with no women, built by Fionn, is then thematically comparable to Fintan, when he runs away from the women and leaps into the waters. Fintan is pursued by the remaining women, and he escapes by running into the waters and then turning into the fish. Therefore, Fintan is a symbol of this escape, this refusal of women and of the sexuality that they represent, This then matching with when Shiva refuses to reproduce sexually and instead goes into the waters to meditate. And at that moment, he gets called Stanu, the motionless pillar. He is the one in the waters meditating as the motionless pillar who has refused sexual reproduction. This then connects directly, as said, to Fintan and to Fechin. Shiva specifically in the Deodar forest has to run away from the impassioned wives of the other sages, the women, and to sever his own phallus in this moment of refusal of the women. He severs his own phallus, casts it into the earth, where it blazes through the cosmos then. He then, in that moment, becomes Stanu, the motionless pillar. The Rudra type makes quite a decent model for a medieval monk in certain respects from this angle, and it's remarkable that some of the ascetic Rudraic aspects may have survived so long within the Finn tradition. There are other saints with variations of the name Fiacha, like Saint Fiacre, who is known for a botanical garden, knowledge of herbal medicine, which makes me think of Cian or Pan, and for curing diseases and infirmities, including curing blindness. He is credited with a hospice where he helped travelers and is said to have prohibited women from his hermitage on pain of infirmity. So again, we have a healing saint, specifically with a story of healing the eyes, healing blindness, as well as an association with aiding travelers, something the Gaulish Mercury also has, and then a prohibition of women from his hermitage, much like what we saw with Saint Fechin's mill. This should all appear Rudraic in ways we have been over many times now. Curiously, Wikipedia reports that from about 1650, the Hôtel de Saint-Fiacre in the Rue Saint-Martin in Paris hired out carriages. These carriages came to be known as fiacres, from this same name, which became a generic term for hired horse-drawn transport. Fiacre, Saint Fiacre, was said to be an unofficial patron of cab drivers. This is all fascinating because of the important Gaulish Mercury name Caesonius, which could mean carriage or basket, and thus suggests a Mercury role related to carriages, travel, and or trade. So it's certainly coincidental that fiacre became a name of carriage cabs in France, and that Saint Fiacre retains a role as helper of travelers and patron of cab drivers. Next we have Mercury Vosegus. He's associated with forests, a mountaintop temple, an image of a bow, and a dog, yet he is identified as Mercury. There is an image of a hunter with a piglet under his arm, and he's associated with acorns/nuts and pine cones, and has 5 inscriptions. It should be clear that the picture painted by these sketchy associations is Fionn/Rudra-esque above all other candidates. Finn/Rudra is the hunter god, and in India and Greece his type wields a bow, as Rudra and as Apollo, and even Odin, when reincarnated in his son Vali, is said to have a bow as well. This is the god with hunting dogs often closely connected, as with Artemis, and though Lu also has 1 hunting dog, Fionn has 2, like how Odin has 2 wolves. The piglet under the arm can connect to the pig associations seen in Cian and Gwydion/Culhwch, or in the fact that Gwyn is the one necessary hunter who has to be present in order to hunt the boar, Torc Truith, and how Welsh Odgar and his Irish cognate Oscar are the ones who must hunt the boar White Tusk and the boar of 4 Mile, respectively. The Finn/Gwyn type is specifically the boar hunter, while the Cian/Gwydion/Culhwch aspect, i.e. the esoterically connected Pushanic aspect, is more intimately identified with pigs. But Culhwch himself does hunt the boar in addition to identification with pigs himself. Fionn kills pigs in 2 boyhood stories at least, in the boyhood deeds of Fionn, and in how Finn obtained knowledge and the slaying of Cúl And Fionn's men also hunt and kill pigs in the story The Pigs of Angus. There are, of course, other pig-related stories not involving Finn as well, but he and his men are the most recurrent pig hunters. Acorns clearly also can connect to the acorns of wisdom that the salmon of knowledge, aka Fintan, eats at the well of Segish, so they can symbolize wisdom and directly connect to the Finn-type god. Mercury Canon Tonensis, a hunting god, with a silver plate with a hunting scene dedicated to him, and 5 inscriptions. This is a hunting motif, a hunting god once again. Fionn/Gwyn is the canonical main hunting god, as aforesaid, and especially if a god is called the most worshipped god and is shown as a hunting god at the same time, it must be a high god fitting the specific bill of Finn. Mercury Moccas, a boar hunter/protector. As just mentioned, the Gwydion/Culhwch/Cian type, also known as Finn MacKinley, is the god outside of the Vishnu type who is most directly identified with pigs. Cian turns into a pig, as does Gwydion, and Gwydion makes the trade for the swine, famously, though other figures come into connection with them too. Culhwch's name connects him to swine, as does his birth, and he is the leading figure in the hunt for the boar Torc-Truith. Thus, if Moccas is the god of boar hunters rather than identified with the pig himself, which is unclear, then Culhwch still fills both requirements, and Gwyn ap Nudd, as mentioned, is the main figure said to be needed to hunt the boar, while figures who are arguably extensions of the Finn/Gwyn type, Odgar and Oscar respectively, also hunt other boars as just explained. They are sons or grandsons of Finn and a stand-in for Gwyn, and thus they seem to be extensions of that god type as their sons/grandsons. So the Gwydion and Gwyn/Finn type, considered as connected aspects, is simultaneously the most boar-connected god other than Nate, the Vishnu type, and is also by far the primary boar hunter, seen in multiple cases. So unless Moccas is Nate, or the boar of 4 Mile, which would then make him a minority outlier among the Gaulish Mercuries as a Vishnu type, then he seems like he must just be Gwyn/Gwydion, the Rudra-Pushan type in some way. Mercury Avernorix. This name gives an example of a Mercury as a namesake of a tribe, the Averni, and has 1 inscription. Mercury Arvanus, probably related to the above, with 7 inscriptions. Mercury Cimbrianus, another Mercury as namesake of a tribe, with 5 inscriptions. As Mercuries who are namesakes of tribes, these Mercuries thus support the claim that Gaedhil and Fenius, namesakes of the Gaels, could be this same god type. Though we can't be sure due to lack of evidence on these Mercuries, this clears the way for a possible identification of the Finn type under Gaedhil and Fenius with even these Mercury names. It shows that these Gaulish Mercuries were sometimes identified with the name of the tribe, just as Gaedhil and Fenius seem to be with the Gaels. Mercury Clariates, a possible healing god, at 1 location. Healing is somewhat generic on its own, but is indeed a standard role of the Rudra god, prominent with Apollo and Rudra himself especially, and also seen in Fionn when he has the power to heal Diarmid with water from his hands but withholds it. Odin also has a well-known healing connection in the 2nd Merseburg charm, for example, and may have been a prominent healing god in some contexts. At other times, the Giankecht type would be the main healing god among the Gaels, but from Caesar's description, he saw the straightforward, dedicated healing god as Apollo, a separate god from Mercury, so to him Apollo probably meant the Giankecht type, the dedicated healing god. As such, a healing Mercury here might point to this more complex and difficult to categorize Finn type, who heals as well as having the other mercurial traits already explored. Mercury Caesonius, an uncertain etymology, possibly meaning carriage or basket, possibly god of trade and protector of travelers. Despite a lack of clarity, this appears to have been an important Gaulish Mercury name. We may speculatively compare this to Odin's name Farmatir, which means god of cargoes or loads, and could have a mercantile implication, though this also is not entirely clear. Regardless, the Romans clearly identified Odin as equivalent of their mercantile god Mercury, so the Fionn type, being equivalent of Odin on his own, has just as much claim to being obscurely connected to trade as any other candidate, such as Lu. In the figure of Gwydion especially, we seem to see a master of outwitting one's trade partner, who rules the exchange with eloquence and illusion. Gwydion may easily be a god of trade and exchange. And then in the figure of Parhalon, even more, we have a pseudo-historical Fionn-type hero who very much introduces all the elements of trade and production, as described earlier: gold, cows, husbandry, and suretyship. Mercury Gabrinus, apparently a goat/ram god, going by the name and the imagery depicted with him. He is found with 10 votive stones. This is a tricky one, not so easily connected to Fionn, but it should be said that the etymology connecting him to goats is not certain. He is pictured with some sort of ram, and Rudra is a lord of animals, Pashupati, as the Pushan type is one as well, an archetypal livestock herder. Pushan also has his cart pulled by goats, as his parallel Pan has goat feet himself, these two being the parallels of Gwydion once again. Thus, it's possible there is a Pan-type connection beneath Gabrinus, or a related Rudraic role as animal lord generally, like Rudra Pashupati. Mercury Valaunus, meaning chief/ruler, connected to healing and, seemingly, fortune in battle. This is a very general couple of connections, and so could match to many gods, but they do fit with the Rudra type well. Odin, for example, governs the outcomes of battles, and again, the Rudra type generally is a healer. All Rudra types connect to battle for the most part. Some of Apollo's paeans were sung in battle to give magical strength and protection to the warriors. And so all of this could connect to Valaunus. And again, the unusual combination of healing and fortune in battle does paint a Rudraic type of image. Mercury Alaunus, meaning nourisher or wanderer. Again, fairly generic and unspecific, but Pushan is called the nourisher in Vedic material, while both Pushan and Rudra can be pinpointed as wandering gods. Pushan seems to wander the wilds more like he is overseeing livestock or finding lost animals, or perhaps guiding travelers, etc., while Rudra is the wilderness wanderer connected to the wilderness warbands and being an outsider from society. And this is equally true of Fionn and his wilderness Fianna troop. Odin is very much known for the disguised wanderer archetype he embodies as well, so the name can fit the type generally. Asus, depicted attacking/pruning a tree. Sacrifices hanged from a tree are said to be given to him, and he is identified with Mercury in the Bairn Scholia on Lucan. Asus is not clearly labeled a Mercury in original Gaulish inscriptions, but in a Bairn Scholia on Lucan, the Roman poet, he is said to be identified with either Mercury or Mars in different scholia. One scholia says he was identified with Mercury because he was worshipped by merchants. This is curious since the Fionn/Odin type can easily be seen as a general Mercury parallel, but also a war god in turns. In addition, one Mercury statue from Lugus is sometimes believed to have a dedicatory inscription to Asus on its rear, but this is uncertain. Asus himself seems to be a candidate for an Odin parallel, the god usually identified with Mercury by the Romans, since humans are said to be sacrificed to Asus by hanging from trees, echoing the Odinic self-sacrifice on the tree, and also, more distantly, the story of Fionn fasting beneath the tree that comes from a shared root with that Odin's tree sacrifice story. The Gaulish medical writer Marcellus of Bordeaux's De Medicamentis, a compendium of pharmacological preparations written in Latin in the early 5th century AD, contains a charm which Gustave Must and Léon Fleuriot proposed was a Gaulish language invocation of Asus, spelled Aisus, for curing throat trouble. This throat trouble would then suggest the concept of the hanging from the throat and things of that nature, thus potentially reinforcing the Odinic hanging type imagery. The text, however, is corrupt, casting doubt on this reading. Asus is known for an engraving on the Pillar of the Boatmen from Paris, in which he appears to be hacking at a tree with a blade, unclear in whether he is merely pruning the tree or trying to cut it down. Now, this is a very small amount of information to go on, and so an interpretation of this scene will always be very speculative. However, a Rudra reading of this pictorial myth seems the most forthcoming and straightforward of any. Rudra is the classic antagonist of the god who either embodies or has spring from his head the sacred tree of being, that is, Brahma/Prajapati. Prajapati and Rudra are polarized sides of the high godhead, and so the hostile god Rudra takes aim at the profligate breaking of perfect wholeness caused by Prajapati's sexual urge and outburst toward procreation, his making the sacred liquid fall to earth and making life spring. Even as Rudra attacks and tries to stop this outflow of life from the sacred tree god, Prajapati/Brahma, he then becomes the orderer and shaper of the outflow that comes about from Prajapati's act of generation. That is, Rudra imposes order on the chaotic outflow of the god who is the blooming tree of being, and as the hostile god Rudra, he tends to do so violently or harshly. He fires his arrow at Prajapati in the myth. He cuts off the head of Brahma. All of this reminds us of Asus with his blade, either attacking the tree or trying to prune it. In the Greek parallel myth, Cronus uses a blade in his attack on Uranos. Rudra himself is said to cut off life like a gourd from its stalk, invoking similar imagery to what we see Asus doing in his famous engraving, cutting the tree that symbolizes life. Also interesting is the fact that Finn chases both of his rivals, Gerig and Diarmid, up into trees in the climax of their chases, so that either Finn or his men are then poised to attack the rival in the tree. The story of Gerig cuts off here, but I think implies an attack, while Diarmid evades attack from Fionn's men up in the tree and then finally leaps down. This attack on the tree-perched rivals could also distantly echo Asus attacking the divinity of the tree, especially since Gerig, the Daksha type, is a lower emanation of the Prajapati type and seems to, in a way, become one with the tree that he's perched in his story. It should also be clear that because of the complex and broad nature of the Finn/Rudra type, it's conceivable that Romans might syncretize him with more than one god type, depending on the face focused on in a given cult epithet. Thus, with the Asus example, he appears to be connected to Mercury and Mars in turn by the scholiasts, which would make perfect sense for a Rudra/Odin type, a complex, paradoxical type. Yet we could easily imagine another instance of the Rudra-type god being equated with Apollo, if he was in a more straightforward healing role or displaying his side connected more with light, etc. So in Gaul, we also have titles like Apollo Vindonos, which could be connected to Windos or Vindos, Windos, the reconstructed Proto-Celtic name for the Finn/Gwyn type. And Vindonos is prayed to for eye healing according to invocations inscribed on bronze plaques. eye associations are already Odinic and Gaul/Finten relevant, and so is healing. So the combination of these two things with the possible etymological link of Vindonus suggests that it's at least possible for Vindonus to be also a Finn-type god, but one syncretized with Apollo due to the prominent healing role, and that this doesn't contradict the other cases where the same underlying god may appear to be syncretized with Mercury or Mars. The assigning of Roman names to foreign gods was not always an exact or consistent science, and different people in different times and places might assign a different Roman name to what was the same complex god beneath. So also Apollo Belenus, with a massive 51 inscriptions, is another possible case that could be a healing and prophecy Finn type, but synced with Apollo instead of Mercury. His name could connect to henbane and thus to prophetic practices, possibly relevant to the Finn type. Xavier Del Mar notes that some of the proposed cognates stemming from behel, B superscript H-E-L, capital H, mean pale, white, or gray, and this would then be cognate in meaning to the name Fionn itself. However, Belenus's identity is much more uncertain for me due to this ambiguity, and there is always the possibility that the healer Gienkecht type also had connections to things like henbane as well, as henbane was used in antiquity for medicinal purposes and not only for prophetic ones. It's also possible that Gienkecht, the healer, was esoterically overlapping with Fionn to begin with, as the figure of Kavath suggests, who seems to be an overlap point between the Gienkecht type and the Fionn type in a legendary hero. And Belenus could represent the higher unity of the aspects. I will remain undecided about Belenus until more definite arguments can be made. However we come down on each case, these examples may suggest that one and the same larger Finn-type god may have been worshipped under both Mercury and Apollo identifications, and perhaps under others as well, showing how he could have been the most worshipped god of the Gauls in general, as Caesar claims. Difficult to categorize, yet widespread and often seen as Mercury. Stella Cromrish elucidates that Rudra is indeed the originator of all the arts in the Vedic sphere, and thus we can begin to understand why all available Celtic material suggests that the same was seen to be the case for Rudra's most direct equivalent, Finn/Gwyn. Quote, "In the Rig Veda myth of Rudra, the origin of mankind, beginning with the Angirases, the mythic fire youths, is interwoven with the creation of poetry, the archetypal act of art in divinis. Although in this myth man is not created in the image of God, the art of man is in conformable imitation of the wonderworks of gods. Works of art are substantiations of divine prototypes. They are their audible, visible, tangible, concrete form. In rhythms and rites, the guardian of sacred order, Vratapa, surveys his domain." Unquote. Quote, "Lord of the sight, Vastu, the ordered field of power, and its numinous guardian, Rudra, the wild god, arose as Vastoshpati, guardian of the order of the cosmos and of the house built by man. It is Rudra who is skilled in art, the best of all artists, and the originator of all arts." See Mahabharata 12, Appendix 1, number 28, line 310. Unquote. Caesar's Gaulish Mercury, the most worshipped god, inventor of all arts, patron of journeys and commerce, was never Lugus. The Lugus theory fails on every count. Lu/Hle is structurally the late-coming daylight sovereign, equal to Mitra, Zeus, Jupiter. Never the originator of arts, but their culminator. Inscriptions to Lugus are vanishingly rare in Gaul, and Caesar explicitly lists a separate Jupiterian sovereign of the gods, implying that the Mercury is not the overtly enthroned king of the gods, yet Lu very much is that. The true Mercury is the Celtic Rudra Shiva type, the primordial, many-named high god who appears in the insular sources as Finn/Gwyn, and his countless doubles or esoteric aspects, Fintan, Parhalon, Gaedhil Glas, Fenius Farsaith, Aver Finn, Averkian, Gwydion, Manawydan, Efnisian, Gwion Taliesin, and more. This is the god who, like Vedic Vastoshpati Rudra, guarding the cosmic house, instantiates poetry and order in the act of creation separation, and metaphysically originates all arts because the patterned cosmos itself is the first work of art. Every strand of evidence converges on him alone. In Irish and Welsh myth and pseudo-history, whenever a culture hero truly invents arts, crafts, languages, scripts, trade, divination, or customs, the role is filled, almost without exception, by one of this god's disguised forms. The Gaulish Mercury epithets and the iconographic symbols like the raven, hunter, boar, tree pruner match the same figure and his aspects with reasonable precision. The solution to this mystery was hidden in plain sight. The Celtic supreme deity, just like Odin and Rudra, delights in proliferation of names and masks. Once the masks are gathered, the single face beneath is unmistakable. The Gaulish Mercury is the wild god who stands behind creation, creation as art, and so the fierce originator of all arts. The traditional Lugus equals Mercury identification survives mainly by inertia, by treating Caesar's inventor of all arts as a throwaway line and by working within an older, atomized paradigm that has not integrated the last 30 years of comparative work on the Rudra and Odin type god, as for instance the work of Chris Kershaw. Once the wider Indo-European framework is implemented here, which is mainstream among competent comparativists, Lu/Hle emerges clearly as a Mitra-type daylight sovereign, late-comer, oath god, second half of the year ruler, and crucially, culminator rather than originator. This profile is fatal to the Lugus theory. Every insular culture inventor and originator of arts figure is, almost without exception, an overt or coded Finn/Gwyn type. The pattern is too consistent and too exclusive to be coincidental. We have, of course, left Goibniu and Oma aside in this as each too narrow and specialized to be the Gaulish Mercury. The scattered Gaulish Mercury epithets and iconography match the Finn/Rudra profile far better than Lugus. These are not necessarily separate local gods. They may be epithets of one polymorphous deity, exactly as Grimnir, Baliger, and Svithur are epithets of Odin, or Triambaka, Pashupati, and Agora are epithets of Rudra Shiva. The Celts simply never wrote a Grimnismal-style master list. The names survived scattered across inscriptions. The Lugus theory requires us to believe that Caesar's specific inventor of all arts claim is wrong or rhetorical, that Lu somehow originated arts despite every Irish and Welsh story saying the opposite, or that things diverge so much between the insular and the continental Celtic pictures that the similarity pointed to essentially undermines itself. Still, many will simply not be able to set aside Lu's title Samildonach and its similarity to Caesar's description. This similarity is hypnotizing, but only as long as we lack understanding of the full set of material. We can move past the hypnotism of a single similarity when we aren't restricted regarding the evidence available to us. The Finn/Gwyn theory makes the pieces click into place with fewer contradictions. Every Roman testimony, most insular invention of art stories, many Gaulish Mercury epithets, and the entire comparative Indo-European pattern. The case is not proven beyond all doubt, as nothing with so little direct evidence can be, but it shifts the burden of proof decisively. This should become the standard hypothesis unless contradicting evidence emerges. Scholars who wish to retain Lugus as Mercury now owe us an explanation for why every insular originator of arts figure is a Finn double, and why none of the Gaulish Mercury epithets look as much like Lu as they do like Finn or Gwydion. Caesar's most worshipped claim is not exaggeration or sloppy wording. It is the trace of an esoteric theology in which the terrifying polymorphous wild god, connected to the invention of letters and languages, was the real center of gravity, while the luminous Jupiterian Lugus was the acceptable public face of sovereignty. The field has been operating with an inverted hierarchy for 150 years. Until the wild god is restored to the center, every attempt to map Gaulish religion onto the insular evidence will remain distorted, and we will be able to feel the distortion if we are honest. Modern practice, built on the Lugus theory, is reconstructing the wrong god. And now we can all relax our arms from all the stretching of the Lugus material to try to turn his Jupiterian nature into a Mercury. My book, Taliesin's Map, The Comparative Guide to Celtic Mythology, is available from Amazon. Link in the description. Thank you to all my patrons for enabling me to do this research. Please consider joining my Patreon if you would like to help make possible our ongoing project of mapping the Celtic and Indo-European myths. Make sure to like and subscribe for more as we map the myths.